Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I'm still not sure why I'm writing this down after all these years. Maybe because I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear that sound again. Maybe because nobody ever believed me. Whatever the reason, it's time I get this off my chest. This happened back in October 2002. I'd been going through a rough patch, lost my job, relationship fell apart, the usual crap. My uncle has this cabin in the Cascade foothills in Oregon, completely off-grid. No electricity except a small generator. No running water besides what you collect from the rain barrel. No cell service. Just trees, silence, and stars. He offered to let me stay there to clear my head, and I jumped at the chance. The first couple days were exactly what I needed. I hiked during the day, collected firewood, read books by lantern light. The isolation was peaceful at first. I'd forgotten what it was like to not hear cars or people or anything man-made. Just wind in the trees and the occasional bird. The cabin itself was pretty basic. One main room with a wood stove, a small bedroom, and a storage area in the back. All solid logs, built by my grandfather back in the 70s. The third night is when everything changed. I'd gone to bed around 10, worn out from hiking. Must have been around 1 in the morning when I woke up to what sounded like someone knocking on the cabin. Not on the door, on the back wall. A single, deliberate knock. At first I thought maybe a branch had fallen or something. I lay there in the dark, listening. Then it came again. Knock, louder this time. Deliberate. It wasn't a random sound or the cabin settling. Something had hit the wall with force. I sat up, heart pounding. Then came a third knock that was more like a shove. The whole wall seemed to flex inward for a second. The logs creaked under the pressure. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. What the hell was I thinking? If someone was out there, I didn't want them to know I was awake. I grabbed my flashlight but stayed in bed. After about 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself it must have been a deer or something bumping against the cabin. Eventually, I fell back asleep, but not before checking that my hunting knife was within reach. The next day, I checked around the cabin, but didn't see any obvious signs of what might have caused the knocking. No broken branches, no animal tracks I could identify. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched whenever I went outside. The forest felt different somehow, tenser, like the air before a thunderstorm. That night I made sure everything was locked up tight. I even dragged the small table in front of the door, though I knew it wouldn't stop anything determined to get in. I went to bed earlier than usual, exhausted from not sleeping well the night before. I woke up suddenly to the sound of my watch alarm beeping. It was 3 a.m. I must have set it accidentally while checking the time earlier. I turned it off and was about to roll over when I heard it. Slam! Something hit the back wall of the cabin with such force that the whole structure shuddered. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Before I could even process what was happening, another hit came from the side wall, even harder. Then another from the front. Whatever it was circling the cabin, hitting different walls. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and sat up in bed, my back against the headboard. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the flashlight steady. Then I heard it, a scream that made my blood turn to ice. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I'd ever heard. It was deep and powerful and seemed to vibrate through my chest. It wasn't just loud. It was primal in a way that triggered something ancient in my brain, something that said, "Run." But there was nowhere to run. I was trapped. The hits against the cabin walls continued, alternating sides like something was circling. These weren't knocks anymore. These were powerful slams, like something massive was using both arms to hit the structure. I could hear the logs creaking under the pressure. Whatever was out there was strong, terrifyingly strong. I pointed my flashlight at the window, hoping to see something, anything, but all I could see was darkness. The beam didn't seem to penetrate more than a few feet outside. Then the sound stopped. The silence was almost worse than the hitting. I strained my ears, trying to hear where it had gone. That's when I heard heavy breathing just outside the front door. Low, deep breaths followed by what I can only describe as a growl. Not like a dog or wolf, deeper, more guttural. Suddenly the wall beside the door took the hardest hit yet, like something had slammed its body or shoulder into it. I heard the wood crack. I was certain the wall would give way, but somehow it held. For what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes or so, it continued circling the cabin, hitting walls, breathing heavily, and occasionally making these deep grunting sounds. I sat there in the dark, knife clutched in one hand, flashlight in the other, certain I was going to die. Then I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden porch. The boards creaked under significant weight. Something was right outside the door now. I could hear it breathing. I aimed my flashlight at the window next to the door, and for a split second, I saw a shadow pass by, massive, at least 7 or 8 feet tall. Then it did something that still haunts me. It scraped its hand, or whatever it had, slowly down the door, not pounding or hitting, but a slow, deliberate scrape from top to bottom. The sound of its nails or claws against the wood sent shivers down my spine. It was almost like it was telling me it could get in if it wanted to. After that came one final roar, so loud and violent that I dropped my flashlight. Then silence. Complete silence. I didn't move for at least an hour. I just sat there in the dark, knife ready, waiting for it to come back. Eventually, the first hints of dawn started to lighten the sky, and birds began to chirp outside. Normal forest sounds returned. When it was fully light, I finally worked up the courage to look outside. What I saw made my stomach drop. The wood on several parts of the cabin exterior was scratched and gouged, not like animal claws. These marks were too deliberate, too organized. At the back corner, there was a deep dent in one of the logs, like something incredibly strong had hit it repeatedly. I didn't wait around to see if whatever made those marks would come back. I packed my stuff in record time and got the hell out of there. I didn't even clean up or lock the cabin properly. I just ran. On the drive home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I've been in the woods my whole life. I know what bears sound like, what mountain lions sound like. This wasn't that. The way it deliberately circled the cabin, the way it seemed to want me to know it was there, the incredible strength behind those hits. It felt like it was sending a message. I've spent years researching what it might have been. The only thing that makes any sense is what I don't want to admit, that I encountered a Sasquatch that night. Something territorial, something that wanted me gone from its area and was demonstrating its power. I've never told this story to many people because I know how it sounds, but I know what I experienced. That thing wasn't just passing by. It was deliberately trying to scare me away, and it worked. I've never been back to that cabin. My uncle says sometimes when he visits, he finds branches stacked in weird formations near the property line, like some kind of boundary marker. He thinks it's just hikers messing around. I know better. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that door, or if the walls hadn't been strong enough to keep it out. But mostly I'm just grateful I made it through that night. The sound of those knocks, that roar, and especially that slow scrape down the door, they're burned into my memory. I still can't explain exactly what happened that night in the Cascades, but I know one thing for certain. Something was out there, something powerful, and it wanted me gone. Story 2. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. Most people I've tried to tell just look at me like I'm crazy or laugh it off, but I know what I saw that morning, and I need to get this off my chest. This happened on December 15th, 2019, just west of Hinton, Alberta. I've been hunting and tracking wildlife in those woods for most of my life. I'm no rookie when it comes to identifying animals or their behaviors. I've seen pretty much everything those forests have to offer, or so I thought. I had set up some trail cams about 3 weeks earlier to track the elk and mule deer movements. Nothing fancy, just the standard motion-triggered cameras that most hunters use. That morning was brutally cold, around -25°C, with a wind that cut right through you. I remember checking the weather report before heading out and thinking twice about going, but I hadn't checked the cameras in over a week and was curious what might be passing through. I drove my F-150 down this logging road I've used hundreds of times. The snow was about knee-deep in most places, with drifts that were much deeper. My truck handled it fine with the chains I'd put on the tires. I parked at my usual spot near a line of black spruce trees, grabbed my backpack with some water and snacks, and started the half-mile trek to the first camera. The sun was just coming up, painting everything in this weird blue-grey light that happens during winter mornings. Everything was dead quiet, except for the crunch of my boots in the snow. You know that silence that comes after a heavy snowfall? It was like that, where you can almost hear your own heartbeat. I was about 200 yards from my first camera when I had to cross this small clearing. I've crossed it so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. But that morning, something caught my eye at the far edge, maybe 300 yards away. At first I thought it was a moose. We get some big bulls in that area, and from a distance their dark bodies can look like oddly shaped boulders against the snow. But this thing was moving differently. It wasn't on all fours. It was upright, walking on 2 legs. My first thought was that it might be another hunter, but no hunter would be out there without bright orange gear in hunting season. This thing was dark all over, and the proportions were all wrong for a human. The shoulders were massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say they were as wide as a doorway. The arms hung way too low, past the knees, swinging slightly with each step. I froze in place, completely froze. I don't know if it was fear or shock or both, but I couldn't move. I just stood there watching this creature as it methodically crossed the far side of the clearing. It was dragging something big. There was a dark trail in the snow behind whatever it was hauling. Blood, fresh blood that stood out sharply against the white snow. I slowly crouched down, trying to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. My heart was pounding so hard, I was worried the thing might hear it from 300 yards away. I had my hunting knife, but nothing else that could be considered a weapon. Not that I was thinking of confronting this thing. I just wanted to remain unseen. From my crouched position, I could make out more details. The hair wasn't uniform. It was longer on the shoulders and back, shorter on the limbs, and what I could see of its face. The head was strange, dome-shaped, with practically no neck, just this massive head sitting on those incredible shoulders. There was a heavy brow ridge that shadowed its face, making its features hard to distinguish from where I was. The thing it was dragging looked like a deer, though it was hard to tell for sure. Whatever it was completely limp, clearly dead. At one point, the creature stopped and adjusted its grip, grabbing what looked like the deer's hind legs in one massive hand. It made this sound, not quite a grunt, not quite a growl, that carried across the clearing in the still morning air. The sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was deep, guttural, and completely inhuman. What struck me was how unbothered it seemed by the cold. I was bundled up in thermal layers, a heavy parka, gloves, and a wool hat, and I was still feeling the bite of the winter air. This thing was just covered in hair. Thick hair, but still, no clothing, no protection from the elements, yet it moved with purpose, unhindered by the frigid temperature that would kill an unprotected human within hours. The whole encounter probably lasted less than 2 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The creature finally reached the far tree line, stepped over a fallen log with an ease that no human could match, and disappeared into the forest, its kill still clutched in its hand. I remained crouched there for what must have been another 5 minutes, afraid to move. My legs were cramping from the position, but I was terrified that if I stood up or made any noise, the thing would come back. Finally, when I was sure it was gone, I slowly rose and backed away. I didn't turn my back on that tree line until I was well into the trees on my side of the clearing. I practically ran back to my truck, slipping and falling twice in my panic. When I finally reached my vehicle, I jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat there, hands shaking so badly I couldn't even put the key in the ignition at first. I was breathing hard, each exhale fogging up the cold windshield. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that massive shape emerge from the trees behind me. It took me nearly 20 minutes to calm down enough to drive. I remember sitting there trying to process what I had just witnessed. This wasn't a man in a suit. The movements were too fluid, too natural. The proportions were all wrong for a human. The way it handled that deer carcass like it weighed nothing. No person could fake that. And in those temperatures, with that level of isolation, who would even try? For what purpose? It wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of bears standing on their hind legs, and this was nothing like that. Bears have a distinctive shape, a way of moving that's unmistakable. This was bipedal by nature, not just momentarily standing up. What I saw that morning was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds, believe me. I've never been one for cryptid stories or conspiracy theories. I'm a practical person who believes what I can see and touch, and what I saw that morning was as real as the trees and the snow. I didn't even check my trail cameras that day. I drove straight home and poured myself a stiff drink, then another. I didn't tell my wife at first. How could I? Hey, honey, guess what I saw today? A Bigfoot dragging a dead deer through the snow. Yeah, that would go over well. I did go back a few days later to check the cameras, bringing my rifle this time. The blood trail was still visible, though partially covered by fresh snow. None of my cameras had captured the creature. They were all positioned to monitor game trails, not the open clearing where I'd seen it. I've thought about that morning every day since. The sheer size of the thing, the raw power evident in how effortlessly it moved through deep snow while dragging a deer-sized animal. The casual way it disappeared into forests that I've spent my entire life exploring, but somehow never encountered this creature before. I've done a lot of reading about Sasquatch sightings since then. A lot of the descriptions match what I saw. The proportions, the dome-shaped head, the long arms. Some people describe them as having a terrible smell, but I was downwind and too far away to notice any odor. What gets me is the purpose behind what I was seeing. This wasn't just some animal wandering through the woods. This was a predator carrying its kill, presumably back to wherever it calls home. It was engaged in a behavior that showed intelligence and intent. It was hunting, killing, and transporting food, just like humans do. For weeks afterward, I was jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder whenever I was outdoors. I still go hunting in those woods. But I'm different now, more alert, more aware that I might not be at the top of the food chain out there. I've told a few close friends about what happened, but most just smile and nod in that way people do when they think you're bullshitting them or had too much to drink. One suggested I might have seen another hunter dragging a deer, but I know the difference between a man and what I saw. No human being has those proportions or moves that way. I'm not looking to convince anyone or start some Bigfoot hunting expedition. I'm not interested in proving anything to the world, but I know what I saw that frigid December morning in the Alberta wilderness. I saw a Sasquatch dragging its kill through the snow, going about its business, just like any other predator in those woods, and nothing anyone says will ever convince me otherwise. Sometimes at night, I still hear that deep grunt it made while adjusting its grip on the deer. It haunts me, not because it was threatening or aggressive. It wasn't. It haunts me because it was so normal. Like I had accidentally glimpsed something that's been out there all along, living alongside us, hunting the same prey, surviving the same harsh winters, yet remaining almost completely hidden from human eyes. I don't know if I'll ever see another one. Part of me hopes I don't, not out of fear, but out of respect. Whatever that creature was, it has as much right to those forests as I do, maybe more. It was there long before humans started carving up the wilderness with logging roads and hunting trails. That's my story. Believe it or don't. I know what I saw. Story 3: I've been debating whether to share this for almost 20 years now. My wife Lisa and I have talked about it countless times, and we always decided against telling anyone. I mean, who would believe us? And honestly, we didn't want to draw attention to our special place. Lake Quinault has been our sanctuary, our escape from the world. At least it was until June of 2003. We'd been going there every summer since 1998. It's this gorgeous lake in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state, surrounded by temperate rainforest. Just picture-perfect postcard stuff. Tall trees dripping with moss, ferns everywhere, that clean forest smell. We'd rent the same cabin each year, this little place with a deck overlooking the water. Nothing fancy, but it was ours for those 2 weeks every June. That particular summer started like any other. We arrived on a Saturday, unpacked, grabbed a beer on the deck, and just breathed in that forest air. The first few days were exactly what we wanted. Hiking during the day, grilling dinner at night, reading books by the fireplace, normal vacation stuff. It was on our 4th day there when things got weird. We decided to hike the Quinault Rainforest Nature Trail. It's this easy loop trail, maybe a mile or so long, that takes you through some really beautiful old-growth forest. We'd done it plenty of times before. The trail goes through this cedar bog area that's always a bit soggy, with these wooden walkways built over the wettest parts. We were in that bog section around midday. Lisa was taking pictures of some weird mushrooms when I got this feeling. You know that sensation when you're being watched? It was like that, but stronger. I glanced around, not really expecting to see anything, when I spotted movement about 10 yards off the trail, behind some tall reeds. At first, I thought it was a bear. We'd seen black bears in the area before, usually just their backsides as they hustled away from people, but this was different. It was big, way bigger than a black bear, and dark, not just black, but this deep, dark brown. The reeds were swaying as it moved, but I couldn't get a clear look, just this massive shape moving parallel to the trail. "Lisa," I whispered, pointing. She lowered her camera and followed my gaze. "Is that a bear?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "I don't think so," I said. "It's too big." Whatever it was didn't make any noise, not a single twig snap or rustle, just this silent, massive presence moving through the underbrush. Then it was gone. We stood there for a good 5 minutes, barely breathing. Finally, Lisa grabbed my arm. "Let's go," she said, and I didn't argue. We talked about it that night at the cabin. Maybe it was a bear, maybe a moose, though they're not common in that area. We convinced ourselves it was probably something ordinary, something that made sense. We'd been coming here for years without incident, after all. 2 days later, we hiked out to Wolf Bar. It's this beautiful little gravel bar on the Quinault River, about a 3-mile hike one way. The trail follows the river, winding through some really dense forest. You know those Pacific Northwest forests, so thick with vegetation you can barely see 10 feet off the trail. It was a clear day, sunny even, which is kind of rare for that area. We were maybe a mile in when I heard it, a knocking sound like someone tapping on a hollow log. 3 distinct knocks, then silence. It came from behind us on the trail. I stopped walking and turned around. "Did you hear that?" Lisa nodded, her eyes wide. We both stood still, listening. Nothing but bird calls and the distant sound of the river. "Probably a woodpecker," she said, but it didn't sound like a woodpecker. It was too deliberate, too intentional. We kept hiking, a bit faster now. About half a mile later, we heard it again, the same 3 knocks, still behind us. I'm not a jumpy person, but I felt the hair on my arms stand up. "That's not a woodpecker," Lisa said, voicing what we were both thinking. We reached Wolf Bar without hearing anything else unusual. It's this beautiful open area with a view of the mountains and the river rushing by. Normally, we'd spend an hour or so there, maybe have lunch, skip some stones. That day, we stayed just long enough to catch our breath. At the very end of the trail, right before it opens up to the gravel bar, we both smelled it at the same time. The most awful rank odor I've ever encountered, like wet dog mixed with rotting meat and something musky. It was so strong it made my eyes water. And right when that smell hit us, we heard those knocks again, 3 of them clear as day. But this time they came from beyond the end of the trail, an area we hadn't even walked through. We looked at each other, and I could see Lisa was as freaked out as I was. Neither of us said anything about what we were thinking. We didn't need to. The hike back was tense. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made us jump. We didn't hear any more knocking, but that didn't make me feel any better. I kept scanning the forest, looking for movement among the trees. Lisa kept close to me, occasionally glancing behind us. That night at the cabin, we finally talked about what we were both thinking. "You don't think it's actually—" Lisa didn't finish the sentence. "A Sasquatch?" I said it out loud, feeling ridiculous even as the word left my mouth. "No, that's crazy. It's probably just, I don't know, some local playing jokes on hikers." But even as I said it, I knew it didn't make sense. Who would hike miles into the forest just to knock on logs and scare random tourists? And that smell, I couldn't explain that away. We decided to stay close to the cabin the next day. We fished from the dock, read on the deck, tried to enjoy our vacation. But every time I looked up at the tree line surrounding our cabin, I felt uneasy. The following evening, we decided to hike to Eiley Lake. It's a short hike, maybe a 1.5 mile round trip, to this small, pretty lake. We figured we'd be back well before dark. The trail is well maintained, easy to follow. We reached the lake without incident. It was peaceful, with dragonflies skimming the surface and the late afternoon sun filtering through the trees. We spent about an hour there, and I started to think maybe we just had an odd couple of days. Maybe it was all just coincidence and overactive imaginations. We started back around 7. The sun was getting low, but we had plenty of daylight left. The forest was quiet. That special kind of quiet you only get in really dense woods, where the moss and ferns seem to absorb all sound. We were about halfway back to the cabin when we heard it. Not knocking this time, a roar, or maybe a growl. I don't have the words to properly describe this sound. It was enormous, drawn out, and unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. Not a bear, not a mountain lion, nothing that should exist in those woods. It came from maybe 100 yards into the forest, off to our right. The sound seemed to fill the entire forest, vibrating in my chest. It lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds, then stopped. Just that one, long vocalization, then silence. Lisa's hand found mine, squeezing so tight it hurt. We stood frozen on the trail, waiting to see if it would happen again. Nothing, just absolute deafening silence. Even the birds had gone quiet. "Run," Lisa whispered. And we did. We ran the rest of the way back to the cabin, not caring how much noise we made crashing through the underbrush. I kept expecting to hear heavy footsteps behind us, but there was nothing. Just our own panicked breathing and the sound of our boots on the trail. We burst into the cabin and locked the door behind us, which seems ridiculous now, like a lock would stop whatever made that sound. We closed all the curtains and turned on every light in the place. Lisa was shaking so hard she could barely hold her coffee mug when I handed it to her. "What the hell was that?" she kept asking, and I had no answer. We barely slept that night, Every creak of the cabin, every rustle outside had us sitting bolt upright. I kept thinking I heard footsteps on the deck, but when I gathered the courage to peek through the curtains, there was never anything there. The next morning, we packed up and left, cut our vacation short by a week, made up some excuse about a family emergency when we turned in the keys at the lodge office. The woman working there gave us a strange look, like she knew we were lying, but she didn't ask questions. On the drive home, we tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was bears, maybe someone was playing an elaborate prank, maybe we were just stressed from work and imagining things. But we both knew whatever was in those woods wasn't something that should exist according to science. It wasn't something that should be in any guidebook or nature documentary. We didn't go back to Lake Canoe the next summer, or the summer after that. It's been almost 20 years now, and we've never returned. We've never told anyone this story either, until now. Who would believe us? And honestly, I don't want curious people going out there looking for whatever we encountered. I still dream about it sometimes. That sound in the forest, that massive shape moving through the bog, the knocking that seemed to follow us, and I wake up wondering what would have happened if we'd stayed another night, or if we'd turned around on that trail instead of running away. I don't know what's out there in the Olympic Peninsula. I don't want to know. But I'm certain of one thing. There are things in this world that don't fit into our neat categories and scientific explanations. Things that are better left alone in their ancient forests, undisturbed by people like us who are just passing through. Story, I've been on the fence about posting this for months now. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anybody of anything. I just need to get this off my chest because it's eating me alive. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I moved to northern Idaho in late 2021 after retiring from my job as a forest ranger. After 40 years of working outdoors, I couldn't imagine living in some retirement community in Florida. I wanted peace, quiet, and the freedom to live on my own terms. I found a beautiful 5-acre plot about 10 miles down an unmarked dirt road from the highway, near the Canadian border. No neighbors for miles, just wilderness. Perfect. I built a modest cabin myself. Nothing fancy, just a bedroom, bathroom, living area with a wood stove and a small kitchen. Set up a solar system for basic electricity and had a gas generator for when I needed more power. I've been hunting, fishing and camping my whole life. I know the wilderness. I respect it. I thought I understood it until last July. It started so gradually, I almost didn't notice. Little things at first, branches snapping in the woods at odd hours, the feeling of being watched when I was chopping wood. I'd spent enough time outdoors to know that animals are curious, so I didn't think much of it. Then one evening, as the sun was setting, I was sitting on my porch drinking coffee when I heard something moving through the trees at the edge of my clearing. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, too slow for a deer or elk, too heavy for a coyote or wolf. Whatever it was, kept circling the property, staying just out of sight in the tree line. I called out a few times, thinking maybe a hiker had gotten lost, but there was no response. Just those heavy, measured footsteps continuing their circuit around my cabin. I brought my rifle outside and fired a warning shot into the air. The woods went completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing, just dead quiet. I went back inside, double-checked all my locks, and kept my rifle close. Around 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by a loud thud against the exterior wall near my bedroom. It was forceful enough to rattle the windows. My first thought was a bear, but bears don't usually approach cabins unless they smell food, and I'm meticulous about storing everything properly. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and carefully checked each window but couldn't see anything. I wasn't about to go outside in the pitch dark to investigate. I stayed up the rest of the night with every light in the cabin on, listening to whatever was out there moving around my property. When morning came, I did a full perimeter check. On the side of the cabin where I'd heard the thud, I found 2 deep vertical scratches in the wood siding. They started about 7 feet up the wall and ran down about 4 feet. What struck me immediately was the spacing between them, at least 3.5 feet apart. No animal I know of in these woods could make marks spaced that far apart. It would have to have an arm span wider than I am tall. I told myself it had to be a bear standing on its hind legs, maybe stretching to full height. But even as I thought it, I knew that explanation didn't fit. The scratches were too deliberate, too perfectly parallel. The next night I was running my generator for a few hours to charge up my battery bank. It sits in a small metal shed, about 30 feet from the cabin. Around 8 o'clock, I heard something slam into the side of the generator shed with enough force that the metal roof rattled. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and stepped onto the porch. That's when I heard it. A roar unlike anything I've ever heard in my 40 years in the wilderness. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, wasn't anything I could identify. The closest I can describe is like a person screaming through a barrel, deep and hollow and somehow angry. It made my skin crawl. Before I could process what I was hearing, something hit the generator shed again, this time with enough force that I saw the roof lift slightly on one side. I'm not ashamed to admit I retreated back inside immediately, locked the door, and turned off every light in the cabin. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to provoke it further. I sat in the dark, listening to it move around outside. It circled the cabin several times, breathing heavily. At one point it came up onto the porch, and the wooden boards creaked under its weight. I had a clear line of sight through my living room window, and that's when I caught a glimpse of it. A large, dark shape moving between the trees. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, with a massive, bulky silhouette. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the first light of dawn broke, I waited another hour before venturing outside. The generator had been knocked completely off its concrete mounting pads. The shed was partially collapsed, with one wall caved in. The generator housing itself was dented, as if it had been struck repeatedly with something heavy. What really unnerved me was finding fist-sized rocks stacked in a line against the cabin wall. 6 rocks, arranged in a perfectly straight line, about chest height. They hadn't been there the day before. I know that for certain. I spent the day fixing the generator shed as best I could and remounting the generator. It still worked, thankfully. I told myself it had to be an unusually aggressive bear, even though nothing about this matched bear behavior I'd seen in 4 decades outdoors. That night, I went to bed early, exhausted from the repairs and lack of sleep. Around midnight, I was startled awake by heavy footsteps crossing my porch, slow, deliberate steps, followed by deep breathing outside my front door. I could hear it sniffing, like it was trying to catch my scent. Then I heard the generator shed door being torn off. The sound of metal screeching made my blood run cold. I got up and carefully made my way to the window. The moon was bright enough that I could see clearly across the clearing to the shed. What I saw there will haunt me for the rest of my life. A massive dark figure was standing by the generator. It had wide, rounded shoulders and long, thick arms that hung almost to its knees. I watched in disbelief as it reached down, grabbed my 200-pound generator and lifted it completely off the ground. Then it threw the generator against the shed with enough force that the entire structure collapsed. The strength required to do that, it's unfathomable. I didn't move a muscle until morning. When I finally ventured outside, the destruction was worse than I'd imagined. The generator was completely destroyed, bent and twisted like it had been hit by a truck. The shed was torn apart, metal panels bent and twisted. But what made my mouth go dry were the footprints, clear impressions in the soft soil, about 17 inches long with 5 distinct toes. The stride length between prints was around 5 feet. Whatever made those prints was enormous and walked on 2 legs. I took photos with my digital camera, though I haven't shown them to anyone. What would be the point? I know what people would say. Over the next few weeks, I noticed things going missing. A folding chair I'd left outside disappeared one night. A metal bucket vanished, only to turn up 3 days later about 100 yards into the woods, bent and dented like it had been squeezed in a giant fist. The final encounter happened in late August. I was sitting on my porch around dusk, rifle across my lap. The moon was already up, nearly full, casting enough light to see across the clearing. That's when I saw it clearly for the first time. It was standing at the edge of the trees, partially illuminated by moonlight, at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller, covered in dark hair, long arms, massive chest, rounded head that seemed to sit directly on its shoulders with no visible neck. It was just standing there, watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. Then it made a short, deep grunt sound, turned and walked back into the trees. Not rushing, not afraid, just calmly walked away. I haven't seen it since that night. I've installed motion sensor lights all around the property and set up game cameras, but they haven't captured anything unusual. I rarely run the generator now, and I don't go outside after dark anymore. I've spent my entire adult life in the wilderness. I've encountered bears, mountain lions, wolves, and every other predator native to North America. Nothing has ever scared me like this. Nothing has ever displayed this kind of deliberate, intelligent behavior. I'm convinced that whatever visited me those nights specifically objected to the generator's noise. It wasn't random aggression, it was deliberately demonstrating its power, showing me what it could do if it wanted to. I still hear things moving around the property at night sometimes, heavy footsteps circling the cabin. Occasionally something will be moved or taken. Last week, a shovel I'd left leaning against a tree was gone in the morning, only to reappear the next day, stuck upright in the ground at the edge of the woods. I'm not leaving, this is my home now. But I've changed how I live. I'm more cautious, more respectful of the forest around me. I run the generator only when absolutely necessary and never after sunset. I don't know what to call what I encountered. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever name you want to give it. All I know is that it was real, it was intelligent, and it was making a point. I believe it could have easily broken down my door if it wanted to. Instead, it chose to demonstrate its strength in other ways. I still think about it every night as I'm trying to fall asleep. I still hear that deep, deep, hollow roar in my dreams, and I still can't explain how those rocks ended up stacked in a perfect line against my cabin. Story 5. I've never been the type to believe in the unexplainable. I'm a facts guy, always have been. My buddies would share their campfire stories about strange things in the woods, and I'd just nod along, thinking they'd had one too many beers. That all changed in June of 2003, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I was recovering from hip replacement surgery that spring. Anyone who's gone through it knows it's no picnic. 6 weeks of physical therapy had me feeling better, but I was going stir-crazy being cooped up at home. The doctor said light activity would be good, so I decided to head out for some fishing. Nothing crazy, just a few hours by the water to clear my head. The Brighton Bush River has always been my go-to spot. It's about 4 miles upstream from Detroit, Oregon, and usually pretty quiet. Most tourists stick to the more accessible areas, which leaves the good fishing spots for locals like me. I'd been fishing there for nearly 20 years, so I knew the terrain well, which was important with my new hip. I packed light that morning, just my tackle box, rod, a sandwich, and a thermos of coffee. The drive out was peaceful, and I remember feeling pretty good about getting back to normal life. I parked at my usual spot, a small turnout that not many people know about. Getting from the car to the river was the first challenge. The path down is steep and uneven, with loose rocks that can trip you up if you're not careful. Before surgery, I'd practically jogged down that hill. That day, I had to take it slow, using my walking stick for balance, testing each step before putting my weight down. It took me about 20 minutes to make what used to be a 5-minute walk. The river was running high that year, about 50 feet across, fast-moving, with deep pools that I knew dropped to 10 feet or more in places. The sound of rushing water has always been calming to me, like nature's white noise machine. I found a decent spot on a small rocky outcrop that gave me good access to a deeper pool where I've caught some nice trout in the past. Setting up was another exercise in patience. Bending down to bait my hook sent a dull ache through my hip, a reminder that I wasn't completely healed yet. The first 15 minutes were perfect. The sun was warm but not hot, with a light breeze keeping the bugs away. I'd just settled into that fishing zone, you know, where your mind kind of empties out and you're just existing, when I heard it. Crack. It was sharp and distinct, like a large branch breaking under serious weight. Not a small twig snap that a squirrel might cause, but the sound of something substantial giving way. It came from across the river, maybe 20 feet up the opposite bank where the brush was thick. My first thought was bear. We get black bears in the area, and they're usually just passing through. My second guess was elk. They can make a racket moving through the woods. I kept fishing, but found myself glancing across the river more often. The opposite bank was steeper than my side, with dense undergrowth and tall pines creating patches of deep shadow even in daylight. I remember thinking that if it was a bear, it would probably just move on once it caught my scent. About 5 minutes later, there was another crack, similar to the first, but closer to the water's edge. This time I reeled in my line and set my rod down, giving the noise my full attention. That's when I saw movement through a small clearing in the trees. At first glance, it looked like a person walking parallel to the river, about 25 yards back from the bank, but something felt off immediately. The way it moved wasn't quite right. It was fluid, purposeful, not like someone hiking through rough terrain, and the proportions were wrong. I'm not a small guy, 6'1", 200 pounds, but this thing made me feel tiny just looking at it. It had this massive barrel-shaped chest that didn't narrow at the waist like a human's would. The shoulders were broad and rounded, and there was barely any neck visible, just this head sitting directly on the shoulders. The color was hard to make out in the shadows, but it looked dark brown or maybe black, like wet bark. What really got me was how quietly it moved for something so big. Besides those 2 branch snaps, it made almost no noise. No rustling leaves, no footsteps I could hear over the river. It was like it knew exactly where to place each foot. It crossed the clearing in maybe 3 seconds, but time felt stretched out. I was frozen, my hand still gripping my walking stick, knuckles white. I didn't feel scared exactly, more like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It didn't fit into any category I had for forest animals. Once it disappeared back into the thick trees, I realized I'd been holding my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I needed to see more to confirm what I'd just witnessed, but the river between us might as well have been a mile wide. With my hip, there was no way I could cross that fast-moving water safely. Even in my prime years, that current would have been challenging. I stayed put for another 10 minutes, hoping it might cross through the clearing again, but the forest across the river remained still. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me. I packed up my gear and made the slow climb back to my truck. I remember checking over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting to see the figure emerge from the trees on my side of the river, though that would have meant it somehow crossed the water without me noticing. Back at my truck, I checked my map of the area. There was a Forest Service road that ran parallel to the river on the opposite side, with a few turnouts that might give access to where I'd seen the figure. I drove about a mile upstream, found a spot to park, and located a path that seemed to head in the right direction. The walking was tough, uneven ground covered with pine needles that made each step slippery. My hip was starting to throb, but I pushed on, determined to get another look if possible. After about 15 minutes of slow progress, I realized the terrain was getting too steep for me to navigate safely. One bad fall could undo months of recovery, and out here alone, that wasn't a risk worth taking. Standing there in the woods, I felt a strange mix of frustration and relief. Part of me desperately wanted confirmation of what I'd seen, but another part was glad for the excuse to turn back. There was something about the stillness of the forest that felt different now, like I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood up despite the warm June air. I made my way back to the truck carefully, constantly scanning the trees around me. Every shadow seemed to hide something, and normal forest sounds, birds, wind in the trees, suddenly seemed muted, as if the woods were holding its breath. Driving home, I tried to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a large person in dark clothes. Maybe the shadows and distance played tricks on my eyes, but I couldn't shake the image of that barrel chest, those proportions that weren't quite human, the way it moved through difficult terrain with such ease. I've always scoffed at Bigfoot stories, thought they were just tall tales from people who'd spent too much time alone in the woods. But sitting in my living room that night, nursing a whiskey and replaying the sighting in my head, I remembered all those descriptions I'd heard over the years. The height, the build, the way they move. It all matched what I'd seen. For weeks afterward, I found myself researching Sasquatch sightings, comparing notes with what I'd observed. I even drove back to that spot twice more that summer, but I never saw anything unusual again. My hip healed completely by fall, but I haven't fished that stretch of the Brighton Bush River since. There are plenty of other spots with fewer memories attached. I haven't told many people about what happened. My wife knows and a couple close friends, but that's it. Most people would just think I was seeing things or making it up for attention. I get it. I would have thought the same before that day. What bothers me most isn't the possibility that these creatures exist. It's the realization that I've spent decades in those woods, absolutely certain I knew everything that lived there, completely oblivious to what might have been watching me all along. How many times had I been observed while thinking I was alone? How many times had something been just out of sight while I cast my line into the water? I still fish, still hike when weather permits, but I'm different now. More aware of my surroundings, more open to the possibility that some things don't fit neatly into scientific categories. That day on the Brighton Bush didn't turn me into a Bigfoot hunter or conspiracy theorist, but it shattered my certainty about what's real and what isn't. Sometimes, when I'm out in nature now, I'll catch a movement in my peripheral vision or hear a sound that doesn't quite match the usual forest noises, and for just a second, I'll wonder if it's watching me again. That figure with no neck and a barrel chest, moving silently through the trees, leaving nothing behind but broken branches and unanswered questions. Story 6. I still feel sick telling this story, but I need to get it off my chest. My wife Jennifer and I moved to our dream property just outside Sweet Home, Oregon last August, 2022. Nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom with a detached shed and about 2 acres backing right up to dense forest. The previous owners had started a pretty decent vegetable garden that Jen was excited about maintaining. We'd been saving for years to escape apartment living in Portland, and this place seemed perfect. Quiet, peaceful, with enough space for our German Shepherd Max to run around. The first few months were everything we'd hoped for. I'd work remotely from my office setup while Jen split her time between her part-time bookkeeping job and tending to her garden. She'd expanded it considerably, adding tomatoes, beans, squash, and even some berry bushes. Max loved having space to patrol, and we'd fallen into this perfect little routine. That all changed in late October. I remember the morning clearly. Jen went out to check on her garden like she did every day, and came back inside looking confused and upset. Several tomato plants had been broken, not cut or chewed, but snapped in half. A whole row of green beans was completely flattened, like something had rolled over them. We figured it might be deer or maybe raccoons, though it seemed excessive for normal wildlife damage. The next morning was worse, more plants destroyed, and this time some vegetables were actually missing. Entire plants pulled up and taken, roots and all. Not eaten on the spot like you'd expect from deer, but completely gone. We decided to install some basic deterrents. a motion-activated light system, and a couple of trail cameras. Nothing fancy, just the kind of setup any homeowner might use to keep an eye on their property. That night changed everything. Around 2 in the morning, Max started growling. Not his usual "there's a squirrel alert" bark, but a low, continuous growl that raised the hair on my arms. Then he just stopped, started whimpering and backing away from the windows. That's when we heard it. This deep, vibrating roar from the direction of the garden. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a cougar. It was lower, more guttural, and seemed to go on forever. The motion lights kicked on, and I grabbed a flashlight to check it out. Jen begged me not to go, but I figured whatever animal was out there would be scared off by the lights and noise. I stepped onto our back porch, and that's when I heard the breathing. Heavy, rhythmic breathing just beyond where the light reached. Something large was moving around out there, just out of sight. I could hear branches snapping and the rustle of movement through our yard. My flashlight beam caught nothing but shadows. I called out, thinking maybe it was a person messing with us. No response, just more movement, circling around the edge of the light. Max refused to come outside with me, which was completely out of character. He's usually the first one out the door when something's happening. The next morning, more destruction in the garden, worse than before. The trail camera had been tampered with, that's the only word for it. The camera was still there, still functioning, but the lens was completely covered in mud. Not splashed, not accidentally hit, deliberately covered, like something had scooped mud from the ground and smeared it over the lens. This pattern continued for several nights. Whatever it was would show up after midnight, stay just outside the range of our lights, and destroy parts of the garden. Each morning, the trail camera would be blocked, sometimes with mud, sometimes with leaves pressed against the lens. We moved the camera several times, hiding it better each night, but it always ended up covered by morning. We started to dread nightfall. The creature seemed to have a routine, and we'd lie awake listening for it. Max wouldn't go outside after dark anymore, no matter how much he needed to. He'd hold it until morning, rather than set foot in the yard at night. Smart dog. About a week into this nightmare, we had a power outage during a storm. No motion lights, no outdoor visibility at all. That's when it got bold. The first impact against the shed made us both jump out of bed. It sounded like something had slammed its entire body against the metal siding. Then again, harder this time. Metal denting, wood creaking. I grabbed my phone and called 911, but in rural Oregon during a storm, response times aren't great. The dispatcher said they'd send someone when they could. Then it moved to the house, first at the back door, not knocking but pushing against it, testing it. The door frame creaked under the pressure, then the windows, not breaking them, just pressing against them, like it was testing our defenses, all the while making these low, huffing noises. Then came another roar, so loud and close it vibrated in my chest. Max crawled under our bed and wouldn't come out. We huddled in our bedroom until dawn, doors locked, the shotgun in hand. I'm not a hunter, never even fired the thing except at a range, but that night I was ready to use it if our door gave way. When morning came, the damage was catastrophic. The entire garden was destroyed, not just damaged, but methodically devastated. Every plant uprooted, every vegetable gone. The shed had multiple dents in the metal siding, with deep scratch marks that no bear could make. They were too long, too deliberate. Our motion lights had been physically broken, pulled from their mountings and smashed. Even the small solar panels we used to light the garden path had been deliberately destroyed. That's when I knew we weren't dealing with normal wildlife. Whatever was visiting our property had intelligence and purpose. It wasn't randomly foraging, it was sending a message. I finally got a deputy out to the property that afternoon. He looked around, took some photos of the damage, and basically told us it was probably bears, maybe teenagers. Said there wasn't much they could do without evidence. I showed him the trail camera footage, or lack thereof, since the camera had been covered each time. He seemed unmoved, like this was just another rural property dispute. Before leaving, he did mention that a few other properties in the area had reported similar garden damage over the years. Just part of living out here, he said. You're in their territory now. Jennifer and I had a long talk that night. We couldn't afford to move again so soon, but we also couldn't live like this. We decided to give up on the garden. We removed what was left of the fencing, cleared out the destroyed plants, and left the area bare, a surrender flag to whatever was out there. The activity tapered off after that, but didn't stop completely. We'd still hear movement in the woods behind our property. Sometimes branches would snap in the middle of the night, or we'd hear that distinctive breathing. Max still refused to go outside after dark. Wildlife seemed to avoid our property too. We used to see deer, rabbits, even the occasional fox. Now, nothing. It's like they know something we don't. The only time I ever caught a glimpse of what might have been responsible was about 2 weeks after we surrendered the garden. I woke up early, just before sunrise, and noticed Max staring intently out the bedroom window. His ears perked up, but his body rigid. I looked out toward the tree line and saw it. A massive, dark figure standing perfectly still at the edge of the woods. It was hard to make out details in the pre-dawn light, but I could tell it was tall, at least 7 feet, with broad shoulders and covered in what looked like dark hair. It wasn't moving, just watching our house. I blinked, and it was gone, stepping back into the trees without making a sound despite its size. We still live here. The mortgage ties us down, and the housing market isn't great for sellers right now. We've adapted as best we can. No more gardening. We installed better security lights and reinforced the doors and windows. We don't go out after dark. Max stays inside at night, but sometimes I still wake up to that feeling of being watched. I'll look out toward the tree line and wonder if it's standing there again, just beyond where I can see, waiting. Watching, reminding us that this isn't really our land. The locals don't talk much when we bring it up. A few have hinted at similar experiences, but they quickly change the subject. Just part of living in these woods, they say, but their eyes tell a different story. They know. I don't know what to call what happened to us. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, or just a very territorial wild animal with unusual intelligence. All I know is that we made an unspoken agreement with whatever lives in those woods. We stay out of its way, and it mostly stays out of ours, mostly. But some nights, when the wind is still and the forest is too quiet, I know it's out there, and I know it remembers us. Story 7. I've gone back and forth about sharing this for years now. Most people I've told think I'm full of it, but I swear on everything I care about. What my cousin Mark and I saw that day in October 2019 wasn't a bear, wasn't a person in a suit, and definitely wasn't our imagination. We'd been riding dirt bikes together since we were teenagers. Mark's a few years older than me, and he'd been hitting the trails in Capitol State Forest near Olympia for years. I'd moved to Washington about 6 months earlier for work, and we'd made it a regular thing to go riding on weekends when the weather was decent. That particular Saturday started like any other ride. We unloaded our bikes at the Rock Candy entrance around 1 in the afternoon. It was overcast but not raining. Typical Pacific Northwest fall weather. We had our usual gear, helmets, boots, chest protectors. Mark rode a Honda CRF 250, and I was on my Yamaha WR 250. We'd packed some water, energy bars, basic tools, and planned to ride until dusk. The first weird thing I noticed was how quiet it seemed. I remember commenting to Mark when we stopped about 15 minutes in to adjust my helmet strap. "Place feels dead today," I said. He nodded and mentioned there weren't many other vehicles in the parking area either. I didn't think much of it then. We spent the next couple hours riding the trails. If you've never been there, Capitol Forest has this mix of wider gravel roads and these awesome single-track trails that wind through really dense forest. Some sections get pretty technical with roots and rocks. We were having a good time, but I kept getting this odd feeling. You know when you feel like someone's watching you? It was like that, but more, I don't know, primal, I guess. Around 3:30, we stopped at a fork in one of the back trails to take a water break. We were pretty deep in at this point, maybe 7 or 8 miles from the entrance on this narrow single track. We killed our engines and took off our helmets. Mark was checking his phone, no signal of course, and I was gulping down some water when I first noticed the silence. I mean absolute silence. No birds, no wind in the trees, nothing. I was about to mention it to Mark when we heard it, this loud crack of a branch snapping maybe 30-40 yards behind us in the thick trees. Not like a twig, like something the thickness of your arm being broken in half. We both froze and looked at each other. "Bear," I mouthed silently. Then came this sound I still can't get out of my head. It was like a deep grunt, followed by heavy breathing. Not animal panting, but slow, deliberate breaths. Heavy, like someone breathing through their mouth, but deeper than any human I've ever heard. My skin instantly broke out in goosebumps. Mark's eyes went wide. "Start your bike," he whispered. "Now." I didn't argue. We scrambled to put our helmets back on, and I nearly dropped mine because my hands were shaking so bad. The breathing sound continued, and it seemed to be moving, getting slightly closer. We kicked our bikes to life, and the engines suddenly seemed impossibly loud in that quiet forest. That's when it stepped onto the trail ahead of us. I'll never forget this as long as I live. About 20 yards up the trail, this thing just stepped out from between the trees. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was enormous, standing upright on 2 legs, at least 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in shaggy black hair, not like a bear's fur, but longer, more human-like hair, especially around the shoulders. Its arms, Jesus, its arms hung down almost to its knees, ending in these massive hands that looked like they could crush a bowling ball. The chest was wide and muscular, and the shoulders, man, they were literally as broad as a doorway. Its legs were thick and powerful looking, like tree trunks. But it was the face that made my blood turn to ice. It had this flat, wide nose and a mouth that seemed too wide for its face. The eyes were deep-set and dark, almost hidden under this heavy brow ridge. The forehead sloped back, giving its head this conical shape. For maybe 2 seconds we all just froze, us on our bikes, this thing standing on the trail. It was sizing us up. I could feel it evaluating us. Then it did something I'll never forget. It filled its chest with air, leaned forward slightly, and let out this roar that I felt in my ribcage. It wasn't high-pitched like a scream. It was deep, guttural, and so powerful that I swear I felt the air vibrate. The sound echoed through the trees. Mark yelled, "Go!" And we both twisted our throttles hard. I went first, since I was slightly ahead on the trail. The path was barely wide enough for our bikes, with trees tight on both sides. I was riding purely on adrenaline, ducking branches, nearly wiping out on corners. The whole time I kept thinking, "Don't crash, don't crash. Whatever you do, don't crash." After maybe 15 seconds, I heard Mark yell something. I couldn't make out the words over our engines and the wind, but the panic in his voice made me glance back. That's when I saw it. The thing was running after us, not lumbering or shuffling, full-on running with these long, powerful strides, arms swinging at its sides, and it was fast, way faster than something that size should be able to move. It was closing the gap between itself and Mark's bike. There was a moment, and this is burned into my memory, where it reached out one of those massive arms and grabbed at a sapling maybe 3 inches thick that was growing alongside the trail. Without even slowing down, it snapped the tree in half like it was nothing more than a pencil, just a casual display of strength while it was in full pursuit. Mark was pushing his bike to the limit. I could hear his engine screaming as he maxed out the RPMs. I did the same, taking risks on the corners that I never would have attempted normally. We had maybe a 100-yard lead, but on those twisty trails, the creature would appear and disappear from view as we rounded bends. The chase continued for what felt like forever, but was probably just a minute or two. My arms were burning from wrestling the handlebars, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Finally, we broke out onto one of the wider gravel roads that crossed through the forest. I knew if we could maintain speed on the straight, we'd have a chance. We both opened up our bikes as much as we could on the loose gravel. After about a quarter mile, I risked another look back. Mark was still right behind me, but the creature had stopped at the tree line where the single track met the gravel road. It was just standing there watching us. Even from that distance, I could feel its eyes. It raised its head and let out another one of those roars, then turned and disappeared back into the dense forest. We didn't stop. We rode those gravel roads at top speed until we made it back to the parking area. My legs were so wobbly, I nearly dropped my bike trying to get off it. Mark's face was ghost white. We loaded up faster than we ever had before, constantly scanning the tree line, and got the hell out of there. In the truck, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Both of us had the exact same experience. There was no misinterpretation. What we encountered wasn't a bear standing up or some guy in a costume. The way it moved, the sounds it made, the raw power when it snapped that tree, this was something else entirely. We agreed not to go public with this. Who would believe us? But we also made a pact never to ride in Capitol Forest again, especially not on those back trails. I've spent countless hours researching since then. People call them Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever. The descriptions match what we saw that day. I'm not some crazy conspiracy theorist. Before this happened, I would have laughed at anyone telling me this story. But I know what I saw. What haunts me most isn't just seeing the creature, but the feeling I had during the encounter. This wasn't some animal acting on instinct. There was intelligence in those eyes. It wanted us out of its territory, and it made that message crystal clear. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if one of us had crashed during that chase. I don't think I would be here writing this. Every time I see a forest trail now, my stomach knots up. I sold my dirt bike 3 months later. I still ride, but only on open tracks now. Never again in the deep woods, and definitely never again in Capitol State Forest. Story 8. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. Every time I start typing it out, I delete everything and walk away. But it's been 8 years, and I still wake up sometimes hearing those footsteps in my dreams. Maybe writing this down will help me process what happened that night in Capitol State Forest. It was early August 2015. My wife Jen and I had been planning this camping trip with our daughters, Emma, 10, and Lily, 7, for weeks. The girls had never been proper camping before. You know, the kind without facilities or other campers nearby. Just us and nature. I grew up camping all over Washington State and wanted to share that experience with them. I chose Capitol State Forest because it wasn't too far from our home in Olympia, but still felt remote enough for a true wilderness experience. We found this perfect little clearing off one of the western forest roads. It was far enough from the main trails that we wouldn't have other hikers stumbling through our campsite, but not so deep that we'd get lost. At least that's what I thought made it perfect at the time. We spent that afternoon setting up our tent, gathering kindling, and exploring the immediate area around our campsite. The girls collected pine cones, while Jen and I prepared dinner over our little portable stove. It was one of those perfect Pacific Northwest summer days, warm but not hot, with that golden sunlight filtering through the massive Douglas firs. The kind of day that makes you forget about work stress and mortgage payments. After dinner, we roasted marshmallows and told not too scary ghost stories as the daylight faded. Emma kept looking into the darkening forest, saying she felt like something was watching us. I laughed it off as a kid's imagination running wild after ghost stories. God, I wish I'd taken her seriously. By 9:30, we were all in the tent. The girls fell asleep quickly, tucked into their sleeping bags in the back half of our 4-person tent, while Jen and I read with our headlamps for a bit before turning in. Everything was perfectly normal, peaceful even. I'd been asleep maybe 30 minutes when I heard it. At first I thought I was dreaming. A single heavy footstep somewhere in the trees behind our tent. I lifted my head slightly, listening. For several seconds, there was nothing but the normal forest sounds. The slight breeze through the trees, a distant owl, then another step. Unmistakable this time. It sounded like something extremely heavy, pressing into the soft forest floor. My first thought was bear, but the spacing between steps was all wrong, too far apart, too rhythmic. I nudged Jen awake, putting my finger to my lips when she started to speak. "Listen," I whispered. Another step, then another. Whatever it was moving slowly around the perimeter of our clearing. "What is that?" Jen whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady for her sake. "Probably just a deer." But I knew it wasn't a deer. Deer don't make the ground shake with each step. They don't walk with that slow, deliberate pace. This was something big, something heavy. I carefully unzipped my sleeping bag and crawled toward the tent entrance. Jen grabbed my arm. "Don't," she mouthed silently. "I just want to look," I whispered back. I unzipped the tent door just enough to peek out. The clearing was bathed in moonlight, but I couldn't see anything moving among the trees. The footsteps had stopped when I unzipped the tent, like whatever was out there knew I was listening and had paused. I zipped the door back up and returned to my sleeping bag. "I don't see anything," I told Jen, trying to convince myself more than her. We lay there in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time. They were coming from the left side of our campsite, moving deliberately toward the back of our tent, exactly where the girls were sleeping. Emma stirred in her sleep. Lily remained completely out, her little chest rising and falling peacefully, unaware of what was happening. The footsteps stopped directly behind the tent, maybe 3 feet from where my daughters lay. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A deep, rumbling exhale. Not a growl, not a snort, but a massive breath being released. The breath of something with lungs far larger than any human's. The tent wall nearest the girls moved slightly, as if from the force of that exhale. Jen's hand found mine in the darkness and squeezed so tight it hurt. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Every instinct told me to protect my family, but some deeper, more primitive part of my brain kept me frozen in place. Making noise or sudden movements felt dangerous in a way I couldn't rationalize. The footsteps began again, moving slowly around the tent. Whatever it was circling us. I could track its progress by the sound of each heavy step and the occasional brush against the tent fabric. The nylon would bow inward slightly whenever it passed particularly close, giving me a sense of its size without ever seeing it directly. After completing one full circle, it paused at the front of the tent near the entrance. I could hear it breathing, deep, rhythmic breaths that somehow didn't sound threatening, just curious. Then it began another circuit. Emma woke up during the second circle. Her eyes went wide as she heard the footsteps. I put my finger to my lips and motioned for her to stay still. She nodded, her eyes filled with fear, and inched closer to her still sleeping sister. The pattern continued. Circle, pause, breathe, circle again. By the fourth circuit, my watch showed it was nearly 2 in the morning. We'd been sitting in terrified silence for hours. My back ached from tension and my mouth was bone dry. Finally, after what I'm certain was the 4th complete circle, the footsteps began to move away from our tent, heading back into the forest. The sound grew fainter until I could no longer hear it at all. "Is it gone?" Jen whispered after several minutes of silence. "I think so," I replied, though I wasn't convinced. We sat in silence for another 20 minutes. Emma had fallen back asleep, curled protectively around Lily. Jen was trembling beside me. "What was that?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. Could have been a bear. But we both knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't circle tents like that. They don't walk on two legs for extended periods. Just as we were starting to relax, thinking whatever it was had moved on, the footsteps returned. This time from a different direction, from the forest directly in front of our tent. It was 3 a.m. "It's back," Jen whispered unnecessarily. The footsteps were more deliberate this time, heavier somehow. It circled our tent once more, but this time it paused longer at each side, as if studying us more carefully. When it reached the back of the tent again, it made a new sound, a low, huffing noise, almost like a sigh. Then mercifully, the footsteps retreated into the forest. This time, they didn't return. None of us slept for the rest of the night. We sat in silence, listening to every sound in the forest, jumping at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. When the first grey light of dawn finally appeared, I unzipped the tent and stepped outside, my legs stiff and sore from sitting tensely for hours. What I saw made my blood run cold. The grass around our tent was matted down in a clear path that circled our campsite. You could see exactly where something heavy had walked, pressing the tall grass flat against the earth. The path circled our tent completely, not 4 times as I'd counted during the night, but 6 or 7 complete circuits. And there were footprints, not clear ones like you'd see in mud, but deep impressions in the soft ground, spaced far apart, much farther than a human stride could reach, much deeper than a human foot would press. They were massive. I called Jen outside. She took one look at the scene and said, "Pack up now." We had the tent down and everything loaded in our car within 20 minutes. The girls asked questions that we deflected with vague answers about needing to get home early. We were on the forest road, heading out by 7 a.m. It was only once we were safely on the highway that Jen and I locked eyes, the same thought passing between us without words. Sasquatch. I'd never believed in them before. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, you hear the stories, but I'd always dismissed them as folklore or misidentified bears. But what else walks on 2 legs with that kind of weight and deliberate movement? What else would circle a tent with such obvious curiosity rather than either attacking or fleeing? The methodical inspection of our campsite, the deep breathing, the huffing sounds. It all pointed to something intelligent, something that was studying us as much as we were fearing it. We didn't talk about it much with the girls afterward. Emma asked once if it had been a monster in the woods, and we assured her it was probably just a curious animal. But Jen and I have discussed it countless times, trying to make sense of what happened. I've researched similar encounters since then. It turns out Capitol State Forest has a history of Sasquatch sightings going back decades. I've read accounts that describe exactly what we experienced. The circling behavior, the breathing, the sense of being studied rather than threatened. We haven't been camping since, at least not in remote areas. The girls have asked, but Jen and I always find excuses. Maybe someday, but not yet. Not when I still wake up, sometimes thinking I hear those heavy footsteps circling our house, that deep breathing outside our bedroom window. I don't know what visited us that night. I never saw it directly, but I know it was real. I know it was intelligent, and I know it was curious about the human family that had wandered into its forest. Story 9. I've never told this story to many people, because honestly, most folks just think I'm making it up or that I was drunk or something. But I swear on everything I care about that what happened to me and my buddy Tom back in April 2001 was real. It still gives me nightmares sometimes. Tom and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We both worked construction in Little Rock and needed to blow off some steam, get away from the noise, and just be out in nature for a weekend. We weren't the types to go to those crowded campgrounds with RVs and screaming kids. We wanted the real deal, just us and the wilderness. We picked Ozark National Forest because Tom had been there once before with his dad when he was younger. He said he knew some off-the-beaten-path spots where we wouldn't see another soul all weekend. That sounded perfect to me, so we loaded up Tom's old Ford F-150 with our gear early on a Friday morning and headed out. It was a beautiful spring day. The trees were just getting their leaves back, and everything had that fresh green look to it. We drove for about 3 hours, and then Tom turned onto this dirt road that honestly looked like it hadn't been used in years. The truck bounced and rattled as we drove deeper into the forest. I remember checking my cell phone and seeing no service flash on the screen. I actually felt relieved. No calls from work, no girlfriend drama, just freedom. After driving down that road for what felt like forever, Tom finally pulled over near a small clearing surrounded by massive oak and pine trees. "This is it," he said with a grin. "Nobody's gonna bother us here." Man, that place was beautiful. There was a small stream about 50 yards from our campsite, and the forest floor was covered in pine needles and soft moss. We spent the afternoon setting up our tent, gathering firewood, and just exploring the area. We cracked open some beers and got a nice fire going as the sun started to set. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. I don't know exactly when I first noticed it, but as twilight settled in, I realized something felt off. It took me a minute to figure out what was bothering me. The forest had gone completely silent, and I mean silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just this heavy, unnatural quiet that seemed to press down on us from all sides. I glanced at Tom, who was poking at the fire with a stick. "You notice how quiet it got?" I asked. He looked up and seemed to listen for a moment. "Yeah, that's weird. Maybe a storm's coming?" But the sky was clear with stars just starting to appear. There was no wind, no smell of rain, nothing to explain why every living thing in those woods had suddenly gone mute. We tried to ignore it. We grilled some burgers on the fire, had a few more beers, and told the usual bullshit stories guys tell when they're camping. But that silence kept nagging at me. It felt wrong on some primal level. I can't really explain. Around 10 o'clock, we decided to turn in. We had just zipped up the tent when we heard it. A scream that made my blood run cold. It echoed through the trees, bouncing around so I couldn't tell which direction it came from. It wasn't human, but it wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard either. It was deep and powerful and intelligent somehow, like it was meant to communicate something specific. Tom and I just froze, staring at each other in the dim light of our little camp lantern. "What the fuck was that?" I whispered. "Probably just a mountain lion," Tom said, but I could tell by his face he didn't believe it. Then we heard it again, louder this time. It started low and built into this bellowing roar that seemed to vibrate the air inside our tent. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the flashlight. "We should check it out," Tom said, but his voice cracked as he said it. I wasn't exactly eager to go outside, but sitting in that flimsy tent suddenly felt like hiding under a paper towel. Whatever made that sound could rip through our tent like tissue paper if it wanted to. We grabbed our flashlights and cautiously unzipped the tent. The fire had died down to embers, casting just enough light to make the surrounding trees look like watching figures. We stood back to back, sweeping our flashlight beams across the darkness, but couldn't see anything unusual. "Hello?" Tom called out. "Anybody out there?" I wanted to punch him. Why the hell would you try to communicate with whatever made that ungodly sound? That's when we heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming from the tree line about 30 yards away. Each step made a distinct thud that I could feel in my chest. Whatever it was big. Another scream ripped through the night, so close and so loud that I actually dropped my flashlight. It felt like someone was driving nails into my eardrums. I've never heard anything so powerful or terrifying in my life. "Fuck this," I said, grabbing Tom's arm. "We need to go. Now." For once, he didn't argue. We scrambled back to the tent and grabbed our wallets, keys and phones, not even bothering with the rest of our gear. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of branches snapping and brush being pushed aside. We sprinted to the truck, fumbling with the doors in our panic. Tom cranked the engine while I kept looking back toward our campsite. The headlights came on, cutting through the darkness, but I couldn't see whatever was making those sounds. Tom threw the truck into reverse, spinning the tires in the dirt as we backed onto the narrow road. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. We both kept saying shit, shit, shit over and over like some kind of prayer. We'd only gone about a quarter-mile down that dirt road when Tom slammed on the brakes so hard I nearly hit the dashboard. "Holy shit!" he screamed, pointing through the windshield, and there it was, standing in the middle of the road, fully illuminated by our headlights. I've tried 1,000 times to find the right words to describe what we saw, but nothing really captures it. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It had broad shoulders, easily twice as wide as a large man, and arms that hung down almost to its knees. Its entire body was covered in dark, shaggy hair. Not fur exactly, more like long human hair, but everywhere. But it was the face that haunts me. That face wasn't quite human, but it wasn't animal either. It had deep-set eyes that reflected our headlights like a deer's, but they moved with intelligence, studying us. Its nose was wide and flat, and its jaw jutted forward more than a human's. I couldn't see its mouth clearly, but when it opened it just stood there, staring at us, blocking the only road out. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Tom's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I could hear his ragged breathing. "What do we do?" I whispered, as if that thing couldn't hear me through the truck windows. "I don't know," Tom said. "Maybe it'll move." But it didn't move. Instead, it raised its massive arms above its head in what looked like a threatening gesture, and then it let out another one of those screams. This time, seeing the source of that sound made it even more terrifying. Its whole body seemed to vibrate with the force of it, and then it charged us. I'm not ashamed to say I screamed like a little kid. Tom threw the truck into reverse again, nearly stalling it in his panic. We started backing up as fast as we could on that narrow dirt road, which wasn't very fast at all. The creature was running toward us with this bizarre, loping gait. Not quite like a human running, not quite like an ape. It was covering ground, alarmingly fast. "Turn around!" I was screaming. "We need to turn around!" Tom was trying, but there was barely enough room on that narrow road. He had to do this awkward 3-point turn while I kept my eyes locked on that thing getting closer and closer. It was still screaming and waving its arms like it was trying to scare us away from its territory. It worked. We finally got turned around, and Tom floored it. The truck bounced violently over the rough road, but we didn't care. I kept looking back, expecting to see that creature right behind us, maybe even jumping onto the truck. But the last I saw of it, it had stopped at our campsite and was tearing apart our tent. We didn't slow down until we hit the main highway, and even then, we drove well over the speed limit all the way back to Little Rock. We didn't stop for gas, didn't stop to pee, didn't even speak much. I think we were both in shock. When we finally got back to town around 3 in the morning, we sat in Tom's driveway for a long time, trying to process what had happened. "That was a Bigfoot, wasn't it?" Tom finally said, his voice hollow. "We just saw a fucking Bigfoot." I nodded, because what else could it have been? No bear stands and runs like that. No human is that size or makes those sounds. It wasn't a guy in a suit playing a prank. We were miles from nowhere, and the power and speed of that thing was unmistakably real. We told a few friends about it later, but most of them just laughed or said we were exaggerating. One guy suggested we'd seen a bear, and our fear had distorted our perception. Another said we must have been drunk or high, which pissed me off because we'd only had a few beers each. Tom and I don't talk about it much anymore. He actually went back a couple weeks later with his cousin to get our abandoned gear, but they couldn't find the exact spot. He said the whole forest looked different in daylight, and all the dirt roads started to look the same. Or maybe he just didn't want to admit he was too scared to go back to the real location. I know I would have been. All I know for sure is what we saw that night was real. Sometimes I still wake up hearing that scream in my head. I haven't been camping since, and I probably never will again. Some people might think that's an overreaction, but they weren't there. They didn't see what we saw. They didn't feel that primal fear that tells you you're not at the top of the food chain anymore. Whatever that thing was, it wanted us gone, and it made damn sure we knew it. And somewhere deep in the Ozark National Forest, it's still there, waiting for the next group of campers who venture too far from civilization. Story 10. I still can't explain what I saw that night in October 2015. I've replayed it in my head countless times, trying to make sense of it, but I always arrive at the same unsettling conclusion. I'm not a person who believes in monsters or goes looking for trouble. I'm just a metal sculptor who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe it was the right place at the right time, depending on how you look at it. I'd been working late at my camper near Canoe Creek Lake, putting the finishing touches on a commission piece for a client in Pittsburgh. It was a sculpture of an eagle with its wings spread wide, about 3 feet across. I'm pretty proud of my work, but that night, all I could think about was getting it done so I could head into town for some much-needed human interaction and maybe a cold beer. The sun had already set when I finally put down my tools. I checked my phone. 7:15. The October chill was settling in, and I could see my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. I hadn't planned on staying so late, so I hadn't brought my flashlight. No big deal, I thought. The road into town was straight enough, and there was still some ambient light. The moon was nearly full, and I knew the path well enough. I locked up my camper and started the walk into town. It's about 2 miles from my spot to the edge of town, and then another mile to the bar, where I was meeting a buddy. The evening was quiet, with that special kind of silence you only get in rural areas, the kind where you can almost hear the stars twinkling overhead. About 5 minutes into my walk, I heard it for the first time. A distinct knocking sound coming from a stand of pine trees to my left. Knock, knock, knock. Like someone hitting a piece of wood with another piece of wood. 3 clear knocks, then silence. I stopped and turned toward the sound, squinting into the darkness between the trees. Nothing moved. The pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches barely swaying in the light breeze. "Hello?" I called out, not too loud. No answer. I figured it was probably a woodpecker or maybe a branch falling. Nature makes all kinds of sounds, especially when you're alone and your mind starts playing tricks on you. I continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road was gravel, and my boots crunched with each step. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet evening. I started to regret not bringing my flashlight, not because I couldn't see, but because having one would have made me feel less exposed. About 10 minutes into my walk, I was lost in thought about the sculpture I'd just finished when I heard a loud crash on the road ahead of me. My heart jumped into my throat. Something heavy had dropped onto the gravel about 30 feet in front of me. The sound was unmistakable, like a sandbag being dropped from a height. I stopped dead in my tracks. At first, all I could make out was what looked like a crumpled shadow on the road. My first thought was that a large branch had fallen from one of the trees lining the road. But then the shadow moved. In one fluid motion, it stood up. There's no other way to describe it. 1 second, it was a heap on the ground, and the next, it was standing upright. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. Whatever it was big. Really big, taller than any man I've ever seen, and I'm 6'1" myself. The creature, because I knew now it was a living thing, rose to its full height, which I'd guess was close to 8 feet. It stood there for a moment, and I stood frozen, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe. Then it turned slightly, and I could see its profile against the night sky. Its legs were thick and muscular, not shaped like human legs at all. They were powerful, like tree trunks covered in dark fur. The fur, or hair, I'm not sure what to call it, was either black or a very deep brown, and it had a dull shine in what little light there was. Not glossy like a bear's coat, but not completely matte either. Then it started to move. It walked, no, it glided across the road with a smoothness that defied its size. There was no sound, no footsteps on the gravel, no breathing, nothing. Just this massive, dark figure moving silently across the road and into the trees on the opposite side. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. My mouth had gone completely dry. I wanted to run, but some primal instinct told me that running would be the worst thing I could do. So I started walking again. Slow, measured steps. I passed the spot where the creature had been, and I noticed that the gravel was disturbed, like something heavy had indeed landed there. I kept going, trying to maintain a steady pace. Not stopping, but not running either. About 100 yards further down the road, I passed a small house with a garage light on. The faint yellow glow spilled onto the road, and I felt an irrational surge of relief, as if that weak light could somehow protect me. I thought about knocking on the door, asking for help or a ride into town, but what would I say? Excuse me, I just saw a monster in the road. They'd think I was drunk or crazy, so I kept walking. My senses were on high alert. Every rustle in the trees, every distant animal call made me flinch. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that massive silhouette following me, but there was nothing. As I walked, my mind raced to make sense of what I'd seen. I'm not someone who believes in the supernatural or monsters. I'm a rational person. But what I'd seen wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I recognized either. The way it moved was what stuck with me the most. The standing up was almost mechanical in its smoothness, like watching a hydraulic lift in operation. And when it walked across the road, it didn't lumber or stomp like you'd expect from something so massive. It moved with a grace that seemed impossible for its size. I've seen bears before. We get black bears around Canoe Creek all the time. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand up and walk like that. And it wasn't a person in a costume either. No costume could capture that fluid movement, that authentic silhouette. By the time I reached the edge of town, I was sweating, despite the chill in the air. My legs felt weak, and I had to stop for a moment to catch my breath. The streetlights of the town never looked so welcoming. I made it to the bar, where my buddy was already 2 beers in, and wondering where I'd been, I ordered a whiskey, something I rarely drink, and downed it in one go. My hands were still shaking. "You look like you've seen a ghost," my friend said, laughing. I almost told him then. The words were on the tip of my tongue, but something held me back. I knew how it would sound. I knew the questions he'd ask, the skeptical looks, the jokes that would follow, so I lied. I told him I'd nearly hit a deer on my walk into town. He seemed to buy it, and we moved on to other topics, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, when I got back to my camper, my buddy gave me a ride. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure in my mind, kept hearing the crash as it landed on the road. I got up and checked all the locks twice, even though I knew if that thing wanted to get in, a lock wouldn't stop it. The next day, I went back to the spot in the daylight. I wanted to see if there was any evidence, any sign of what had happened. The gravel was disturbed where I remembered the creature landing, but that could have been anything. There were no footprints that I could see, no hair caught on branches, nothing conclusive. In the days that followed, I did some research. I looked up local wildlife, thinking maybe there was a rational explanation, but nothing matched what I'd seen. Then, almost against my better judgment, I started reading about Bigfoot sightings. The descriptions matched. The height, The dark fur, the fluid movement, and the knocking sounds I'd heard earlier. Apparently, that's a common feature in Bigfoot reports. They're said to communicate by knocking on trees. I've never been one for cryptozoology or conspiracy theories. Before that night, if someone had told me they'd seen Bigfoot, I would have smiled politely while thinking they were either lying or mistaken. But now I'm not so sure. The more I think about it, the more I believe what I saw was a Bigfoot. It makes a strange kind of sense. If these creatures exist, they'd have to be primarily nocturnal to avoid human detection. They'd have to be good at staying hidden, at avoiding contact with humans. The one I saw seemed as surprised to encounter me as I was to encounter it. Maybe it had been crossing the road and didn't expect anyone to be walking there so late. I haven't told many people about this. Just a couple of close friends who I trust not to think I'm crazy, and now I'm sharing it here. I don't have proof. I don't have a photo or a footprint cast. All I have is what I saw and what I felt that night. Sometimes I still go out to my camper to work on sculptures. I'm more careful now. I always bring a flashlight and I try to get back before dark. Sometimes when I'm there late and the woods are quiet, I listen for those knocks. Part of me hopes to hear them again, to know that what I saw wasn't a hallucination or my mind playing tricks on me. Another part hopes I never encounter whatever it was again. All I know for sure is that something crossed that road in front of me that night. Something big, something that moved like nothing I've ever seen before. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house is quiet, I swear I can hear knocking in the distance, like something out there is trying to communicate, like it's letting me know it's still there, watching and waiting in the darkness beyond the trees. Story 11. I've been wrestling with whether to share this for a long time. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up, and honestly, I wouldn't blame them, but I need to get this off my chest after all these years. I know what I saw. This happened back in September of 1980 when I was 15. I lived in Monroe County, Michigan, in a small rural area surrounded by farmland. Our house was nothing special, just a simple family home, but we had woods nearby. Not massive forests or anything, just a small woodlot about 10 acres in size. It was less than a mile from our house, and I'd go there all the time. I knew every inch of those woods. That day, I grabbed my .22 rifle to go squirrel hunting. It was something I did regularly in the fall. My dad had taught me to hunt, and I was pretty decent at it. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, not too cold, just a regular September afternoon with the leaves starting to change. I remember wearing my favorite flannel shirt and jeans. Nothing about the day seemed unusual as I headed out. The woodlot was surrounded by farm fields on all sides, with this small stream running along the south side. I always entered through this dirt lane the farmer used for his equipment. I'd gone down that same path hundreds of times before. As I approached the woods, I noticed something odd. The birds were acting strange, not just a few. The birds, redwings, robins, jays, cardinals, they were all flitting around in this frenzied way through the underbrush. I'd never seen anything like it. They weren't flying away exactly, just moving around frantically, like something had disturbed them. I remember thinking maybe a hawk was around, or someone else was walking through the woods. I kept my eyes on the bird activity as I continued down the lane, my .22 slung over my shoulder. The lane had a slight bend to it, and I was still looking back at the birds when I rounded that bend. When I finally turned my head forward again, my entire body froze, completely locked up. Standing about 25 yards ahead of me on the trail was something that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, and covered in reddish-brown hair. It stood just off the left side of the trail in some underbrush. I couldn't see below its waist because of the vegetation, but its upper body was enormous. The shoulders had to be at least 3 feet wide. Not like a tall, lanky basketball player, this thing was stocky and looked incredibly strong, like nothing I'd ever seen before. The hair on its body wasn't uniform. On its face it was shorter, but on its head and shoulders it was longer, maybe 3 to 5 inches. Its head was large and oddly shaped, flat on top, not rounded like a human head, but it was the face that I still see in my nightmares. The eyes were completely black, no whites at all. They weren't glowing or anything supernatural like that, just deep, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its nose was flat against its face, and its mouth was large, too large for a human face. We just stared at each other. I don't know how long we stood there. It might have been 10 seconds or 2 minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing. Was it a bear standing on its hind legs? No, bears don't look like that. Was it someone in a costume, in these woods, in the middle of nowhere? No way. I remember my hand tightening around my rifle, but I never raised it. Something deep inside told me that would be a terrible idea. This thing could tear me apart before I even got a shot off. I wasn't even sure if a .22 would do anything to it anyway. Then something even stranger happened. While still watching me, it casually turned its body slightly toward a berry bush beside it. Without taking its eyes off me, it started eating. It began picking berries from the bush, but not like a person would. Its arm movements were fluid but somehow wrong, unhuman. Instead of picking individual berries with its fingers, it raked its hand through the branches, stripping several berries at once, then bringing them to its mouth. The way it moved, I can't really describe it properly. It was efficient but alien, like watching someone do something completely ordinary, but in a way that makes your skin crawl because it's just wrong. I realized something in that moment. It wasn't afraid of me at all, not even a little bit. It was just curious maybe, but mostly indifferent, like I was no threat whatsoever, and it was right. When it started eating those berries, I saw my chance. I began backing away slowly, never turning my back to it. My legs were shaking so bad I thought I might fall over. I kept my eyes locked on it until I rounded that bend in the trail and it was out of sight. Then I walked faster, and once I hit the edge of the woodlot, I flat out ran. I ran all the way across the field back toward my house, expecting at any moment to hear heavy footsteps behind me. By the time I reached home, I was drenched in sweat and breathing so hard I thought my lungs would burst. My mom asked what was wrong, and I just mumbled something about seeing a big coyote. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't tell anyone. I sat in my room that night, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I knew what people called these things, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, but they weren't supposed to be real. They were campfire stories, tabloid headlines, not something you actually encountered in a small woodlot in Michigan. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those black eyes staring back at me. I kept hearing sounds outside my window, imagining that thing had followed me home. The next morning, I told myself maybe I'd imagined it all, that the light had played tricks on me, that it was just a bear, or something else I'd misidentified, but I knew better. The image was too clear, too detailed to be my imagination. I didn't go back to those woods for weeks. When I finally did, I brought my dad's more powerful rifle and made sure my friend Mark came with me. We didn't see anything unusual that day, or any day after. But I never went into those woods alone again. I've read about other Bigfoot sightings over the years, always in secret, always with a mixture of fear and validation. Some descriptions match exactly what I saw. The flat head, the strange berry-picking behavior. It makes my stomach knot up every time. The crazy thing is, that woodlot was tiny, just 10 acres surrounded by open farmland. How could something that big live there without everyone knowing? Where did it go? Did it just pass through? Was there a den or cave I never knew about? These questions have haunted me for decades. I never told anyone about this for years. Not my parents, not my friends, nobody. I was afraid of the ridicule, of being labeled the crazy kid who thought he saw Bigfoot. It wasn't until I was in my 30s that I finally told my wife, and later my brother. They believed I saw something, but I could tell they weren't sure what to make of it. Sometimes I drive by that area when I visit my parents. The woodlot is still there, looking exactly the same. I always slow down as I pass, half expecting to see that figure standing at the edge of the trees, watching me. I never have, but the feeling that it's still out there somewhere has never left me. I've tried to rationalize it over the years. Maybe it was someone playing a prank, though who would do that in the middle of nowhere? Maybe it was some kind of undiscovered animal, though nothing that size could remain hidden in Michigan. Maybe my teenage mind exaggerated what I saw, though the memory remains crystal clear. But deep down, I know what I saw that day. It was real, it was intelligent, and it let me walk away. Sometimes I wonder if it remembers me too. That skinny, terrified kid with a .22 rifle who stumbled into its feeding ground one September afternoon in 1980. I still don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe because I'm older and care less what people think. Maybe because I need to know if anyone else has seen something similar in that area, or maybe because carrying this alone for so long has become its own burden. All I know is that the woods have never felt the same to me since. Every time I hear rustling in the underbrush or birds suddenly taking flight, part of me freezes, just like I did on that trail. Part of me is still there, locked in that moment, staring into those black eyes that shouldn't exist, wondering which of us is really the intruder. Story 12. I never believed in the supernatural. I'm a contractor. I deal in what's measurable, what's real, wood and nails, concrete and steel. But what happened that October night in 2000 at our cabin in Pinewood Ridge still haunts me 23 years later. I'm only sharing this now because I need to get it off my chest. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. My wife Lisa and I had just finished building our dream cabin that summer. A beautiful 2-story A-frame nestled in Pinewood Ridge, about 40 miles from the nearest real town. We'd bought the land years earlier, spending weekends camping there while slowly saving to build. We were so proud of that place. Cedar siding, a big stone fireplace, windows everywhere to let in the mountain light. That weekend in October, we invited some friends up to celebrate. Nothing fancy, just good food, music, and drinks around the fire pit. There were 6 of us total. Lisa and me, our friends Kevin and his wife Tara, my buddy from work Mark, and his new girlfriend Melanie. None of them except Kevin had been to our property before. It was a perfect fall day. The leaves were that incredible mix of red and gold. The air had that crisp bite to it that makes coffee taste better. We spent the afternoon hiking, then grilled steaks as the sun went down. After dinner, we moved inside when the temperature dropped. I'd just stoked the fire in the fireplace, and we were all sitting around with beers and whiskey, trading stories and laughing. Then Lisa mentioned something that had happened a few years back when we were still camping on the property. "I never told you guys this," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "But there was this one morning when Victor was still asleep in the tent. I got up early to use the bathroom. We just had that little outhouse back then. It was barely dawn, everything was grey and misty, and I saw something moving through the trees about 50 yards away. Kevin, who'd heard this before, nodded knowingly. The others leaned in. It was big, moving on 2 legs, Lisa continued. Grey-coloured, almost pewter, moving faster than a person should be able to move through those woods. I froze, and it just kept going. Disappeared into the trees by where the small cabin sits now." "Did you tell Victor?" Tara asked. "Not until later that day. I thought maybe I was half asleep and imagining things, but I know what I saw." That's when Melanie laughed, not meanly, but dismissively. She was a pharmaceutical rep, very rational, very city. "Sorry, but that sounds like classic sleep paralysis. Your brain wakes up before your body, creates hallucinations. It's pretty common." "I wasn't paralyzed," Lisa said quietly. "I was standing outside the tent." "Well, there has to be a logical explanation," Melanie said, shrugging. "No offense, but these woods play tricks on people's minds, especially at dawn, when the light is weird." I should mention that since building the cabin, we'd had some strange experiences. Nothing I could definitively call supernatural, but enough oddities to make us wonder. We'd hear wood-knocking sounds sometimes, far off in the forest. Once, while staying in our Winnebago during construction, something hit the side hard enough to rock the whole vehicle. We'd run outside and found nothing, and the smell, God, the smell that had woken both me and my daughter Emma during her visit in July of '99, like ammonia and urine mixed with rotting meat. It filled the cabin and then was gone by morning, but I didn't share any of this with the group. I didn't want to seem like one of those backwoods types who sees Bigfoot behind every tree. Around midnight, Melanie said she was tired and wanted to turn in. We'd set her and Mark up in the small guest cabin about 50 yards from the main house. Just a one-room structure with a bathroom and queen bed. Mark wanted to stay up longer, so Melanie took the flashlight and headed out alone. We were all laughing at something Kevin had said when we heard it, a scream that turned my blood cold. It wasn't a startled yelp or a surprised shout. It was pure terror. I was out the door before anyone else moved, grabbing the big maglite from the hook by the door. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw Melanie frozen in place, about halfway between our main cabin and my truck, which was parked at the edge of the clearing. She wasn't moving, just standing there, arms wrapped around herself. "Melanie!" I called, rushing toward her. The others were behind me now. When I reached her, I could see she was shaking violently. Her face was drained of all color, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't even speak at first, just grabbed my arm with cold fingers. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I asked, scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, trying to find her voice. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "There was something by your truck, standing there." Mark had reached us by then and put his arm around her. "What do you mean, something?" "It was huge," she said, her voice shaking. "Grey, standing by the driver's door. Upright, like a person, but not a person, so broad in the shoulders, 6, maybe 7 feet tall, maybe taller." I immediately turned my flashlight toward the truck. There was nothing there now. "Stay here," I told them, and despite Lisa's protest, I walked over to the truck. It was about 30 yards from where we stood. I approached cautiously, sweeping the light around. The truck sat undisturbed. No footprints in the dirt around it. No broken branches. No smell. Nothing. I circled the entire vehicle and checked underneath it. Whatever Melanie had seen was gone. When I returned, Melanie was sitting on the ground, Mark's jacket around her shoulders. She was still trembling. "There's nothing there now," I said gently. "I know what I saw," she whispered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "It was watching me. When I saw it, it turned its head toward me. That's when I screamed. Then it moved into the trees. So fast, too fast." We got her inside, and Lisa made her tea with a shot of whiskey. Melanie wouldn't let Mark go back to the guest cabin, so we set them up in our living room for the night. I stayed up until nearly 3 in the morning, sitting by the window with my shotgun across my lap. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The next morning, I called a guy I knew, Jerry Blackwell. He did some hunting and tracking in the area. I didn't tell him exactly what Melanie had reported, just that we'd had a scare with what might have been a large animal. He came out and walked the entire property, looking for tracks, scat, broken branches, anything unusual. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Vic," he said after 2 hours of searching. "Some deer tracks over by the creek, raccoon markings on that old stump, but nothing big enough to scare anyone. No bear signs at all." Melanie barely ate that day. She sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather, her eyes constantly scanning the tree line. We decided to cut the weekend short and head back to town that afternoon. As we were packing up, Melanie pulled me aside. "Victor, I need you to know I'm not crazy," she said. Her voice was steady now, but her eyes were still haunted. "I don't believe in monsters or Bigfoot or any of that stuff. I'm not some hysterical person, but what I saw last night was real. I believe you saw something that scared you, I said carefully. No, she said, gripping my arm. I saw something that shouldn't exist. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person in a costume, the way it moved, the way it looked at me. It knew I was there. It was intelligent. I didn't know what to say to that. That was 23 years ago. Melanie broke up with Mark a few weeks later. She's refused all invitations to return to the cabin, and when the topic comes up at gatherings, she leaves the room. We've stayed friends, but she will not discuss what happened that night. Not ever. Lisa and I still own the cabin. We still spend weekends there, and over the years there have been other incidents, more wood-knocking sounds, strange screams in the distance that aren't quite animal, aren't quite human. The smell returns occasionally, always at night, always gone by morning. I've installed trail cameras, motion sensor lights, a better security system. Nothing has ever been captured on film. Nothing has ever tripped the sensors when these events occur. It's like whatever visits our property knows exactly how to avoid detection. I don't know what Melanie saw that night. I can't confirm it was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot or whatever you want to call it. All I know is that a rational, skeptical woman who laughed at the idea of monsters one minute was permanently changed by something she saw the next. Her fear was too genuine, too visceral to dismiss, and the way she's maintained her silence all these years speaks volumes. The strangest part? I'm not afraid to be at the cabin, neither is Lisa. Whatever it is that passes through our property has had countless opportunities to harm us and never has. It's like we have an unspoken agreement. We don't bother it, it doesn't bother us. But I still don't go outside at night alone. I still keep the shotgun loaded, and when I hear those knocks in the distance or catch that unmistakable smell, I make sure all the doors are locked, the curtains drawn, because I may not be afraid, but I'm not stupid either. Something shares those woods with us, something that doesn't want to be seen, and after what happened to Melanie, I'm content to keep it that way. Story 13. I still get chills thinking about that day in October 1984. I was 17 years old, and our annual family hunting trip to Roscommon County was something I looked forward to all year. My dad, my Uncle Paul, my cousin Mark and I had been going to the same spot where sections 18 and Pond Road intersect for as long as I could remember. It was our tradition, a weekend of male bonding, hunting white-tailed deer and camping under the Michigan stars. The weather that day was typical for northern Michigan in October, crisp and cool with temperatures hovering around 45 degrees. The leaves had turned their brilliant fall colors, creating a canopy of red, orange and yellow above us. Most had already fallen, carpeting the forest floor and making every step a crunchy announcement of our presence. We'd set up our camp earlier that morning. 3 tents, a fire pit, and our gear neatly organized the way my dad had taught us. We weren't fancy campers by any means. My dad believed in roughing it, said it built character. The camp was situated in a small clearing surrounded by thick woods, mostly oak and maple with some pine mixed in. I remember the smell of those pines, sharp and clean against the musty scent of the fallen leaves. After setting up camp, we decided to scout the area before evening fell. Dad suggested we walk up the 2-track road to check for deer signs and familiarize ourselves with the terrain again, even though we'd been coming here for years. The 4 of us grabbed our orange vests, safety first, as Dad always said, and headed out. The 2-track was rutted and worn, winding through the woods like a narrow brown ribbon. We walked in a loose formation, Dad and Uncle Paul in front, Mark and I bringing up the rear. We weren't talking much, just occasional whispers about tracks we spotted or potential hunting spots for the next day. We'd gone maybe a quarter mile from camp when the road started to climb. It wasn't a major hill, but steep enough that I could feel the burn in my calves as we ascended. The trees thinned out a bit on either side of the road as we climbed, creating better visibility. About halfway up the hill, Dad suddenly stopped. Uncle Paul froze beside him. Their bodies went rigid, and the sudden tension was like electricity in the air. Mark and I nearly bumped into them. "What is it?" I whispered, trying to peer around my dad's shoulder. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. As soon as I shifted position, I saw it. Standing at the top of the two-track, maybe 50 yards ahead of us, was something. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that shouldn't exist. It was massive. That's what hit me first. The figure stood in the middle of the road, its dark silhouette stark against the afternoon sky behind it. It was at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Even at that distance, I could see it was covered in dark hair or fur, not like a bear, more like a matted coat that covered its entire body. The sun was behind us, so we could see it clearly, but I doubt it could see us well with the sun in its eyes. The creature was broad-chested, with shoulders that seemed impossibly wide. Its arms hung at its sides, noticeably longer than any human's should be, reaching almost to its knees. I couldn't make out its face clearly at that distance, just a darker patch where a face should be. But I could see the massive head sat directly on those shoulders, with little or no neck visible. None of us moved. None of us spoke. I don't think any of us even breathed. The only sound was the blood pounding in my ears and the distant call of a crow somewhere in the forest. The creature stood completely still, too. It was watching us. I was certain of it. Despite not being able to see its eyes, I could feel its gaze fixed on our group. I'd seen drawings of Bigfoot before. There was even a life-size statue at a tourist trap we passed on our way up north. I'd always laughed at that stuff. But standing there on that road, looking at this thing, I wasn't laughing. This wasn't a man in a suit. No costume could capture the sheer mass, the proportions, the wrongness of what stood before us. I don't know how long we stood there facing each other. It felt like forever, but it was probably less than a minute. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Could it be a bear standing on its hind legs? No, the proportions were all wrong. A person playing a prank. Impossible. No one could be that tall, that broad, have arms that long. Then my dad did something that broke the spell. He took one slow step backward. The creature shifted its weight slightly. Just that small movement sent a bolt of pure terror through me. Whatever survival instinct humans still possess kicked in hard at that moment. "Go," Dad whispered, his voice barely audible. "Back to camp. Now." We turned as one and began walking quickly back down the hill. No one ran at first. It was like we were afraid that sudden movement would trigger something, but after about 10 steps, Uncle Paul broke into a jog, and the rest of us followed suit. I couldn't help myself. About 20 yards down the hill, I glanced back over my shoulder. The figure was still there, standing motionless, watching us retreat. That image burned itself into my brain. The dark silhouette against the sky, unnaturally large and still. We didn't stop running until we reached camp. We burst into the clearing, all 4 of us panting and wild-eyed. Dad immediately went for his rifle, which was still in its case. "What the hell was that?" Mark finally managed to say. His face was ghost white. "I don't know," Uncle Paul replied. His hands were shaking as he reached for his cigarettes. "Everyone saw it, right?" I asked, needing confirmation that I hadn't hallucinated the whole thing. They all nodded. No one questioned what we'd seen. No one tried to rationalize it away. We all knew. "Bigfoot," I said quietly, testing the word. Dad shot me a look. He wasn't a man who believed in such things. He was practical, grounded in reality. But even he couldn't deny what we'd just encountered. "Whatever it was, we're staying in camp," he said firmly. "We stick together, keep the fire going all night." None of us argued. The rest of the day passed in a strange haze. We went through the motions of setting up for the evening, gathering more firewood, preparing dinner, but our eyes kept darting to the tree line. Every snap of a twig made us jump. The forest that had always felt like a second home now seemed alien and threatening. As dusk approached, Dad and Uncle Paul had a quiet conversation by the fire. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like leave in the morning and not worth the risk. I'd never seen my dad spook before. He was always the calm one, the one who knew what to do in any situation. Seeing him unsettled only amplified my own fear. Dinner was a silent affair. No one had much appetite. Even the usual campfire banter was absent. Instead, we sat in a tight circle, each lost in our thoughts, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows that made us flinch. We should go back and check for tracks tomorrow, I suggested, breaking the silence, before we leave. Dad nodded slowly. Maybe we'll see. That night was the longest of my life. We decided to all sleep in the largest tent rather than split up as we usually did. None of us said it, but we all felt safer together. I don't think any of us slept more than a few minutes at a time. Every sound from the forest seemed amplified. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the crackle of our dying fire. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, the sheer size of the creature, the way it stood so still, watching us, the inhuman proportions. I'd been coming to these woods my entire life and had never felt afraid, until now. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as it was light, we packed up camp with record speed. Dad and Uncle Paul decided we should check the area where we'd seen the figure before we left. Safety in numbers, they said, and in daylight. The walk back up the two-track was tense. We moved slowly, every sense on high alert. Dad and Uncle Paul had their rifles ready. The forest seemed quieter than usual. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering. It was as if the whole woods was holding its breath. When we reached the spot where we'd seen the creature, we stopped and surveyed the area. The two-track at the top of the hill was composed of soft gravel and sand, and there, pressed into that surface, were footprints. They weren't clear tracks like you'd see in mud or snow, more like depressions where something heavy had stood. They were large, much larger than any human foot, and showed what looked like 5 toes. The stride length, measurable from a few partial tracks leading into the woods, was enormous. Uncle Paul knelt down beside one of the prints. "Jesus," he whispered, "look at the size of these." Dad remained standing, his rifle at the ready, eyes scanning the tree line. "Could be anything," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. We followed the direction of the tracks to where they entered the forest. The undergrowth was disturbed there, branches broken at a height that would be well above any of our heads. We didn't follow the trail into the woods. By unspoken agreement, we'd seen enough. We returned to our vehicles and left the camping area by mid-morning. The drive home was quiet. We tried to talk about what we'd seen, to make sense of it, but the words felt inadequate. Uncle Paul, who'd always scoffed at Bigfoot stories, was subdued. "I'm not saying what it was," he kept repeating. "I'm just saying I can't explain it." I continued hunting and camping at that location from 1984 until the early 2000s. I couldn't stay away. The area had been part of our family tradition for too long, but things were different after that October day. We never went anywhere alone. We carried whistles and made more noise than necessary. We kept the fire burning brighter and later. Over those years, I had 3 other incidents in that same area that I can't explain. Once, in 1988, I heard wood knocks echoing through the forest. 3 distinct knocks, then 2, then 3 again. Another time, in 1991, something large circled our campsite all night, just beyond the light of our fire, though we never saw what it was. And in 1997, I found a crude structure of branches and limbs deep in the woods, formed into what looked like a primitive shelter, far from any trail or road. I've researched that area since then. Roscommon County is a mix of forests, hills, and small bodies of water. Perfect habitat for something that wants to remain hidden. The section where we camped is particularly remote, bordered by state land and private hunting parcels. I'm 45 now, with kids of my own. I've told them about that day, though my wife thinks I'm just trying to scare them with campfire stories. Maybe she's right. Maybe time has distorted my memory. Maybe what we saw was just a bear or a man or some trick of light and shadow. But in my quieter moments, when I close my eyes, I can still see that figure standing on the 2-track, impossibly tall, impossibly still, watching us with an intelligence that felt ancient and aware. And I know with a certainty that transcends logic that what we encountered that October day was something science hasn't classified, something that shouldn't exist but does. I haven't been back to that spot in almost 20 years, but sometimes I wonder if it's still there, moving silently through the forests of northern Michigan, watching and waiting for the next group of hunters to climb that hill. Story 14. I've hesitated to post this for months, but after what happened last night, I can't keep this to myself anymore. I need to know if anyone else has experienced anything similar. My wife Sarah and I moved to Truro, Iowa in early 2021. It's this tiny town with maybe 500 people surrounded by nothing but corn and bean fields as far as you can see. We bought this fixer-upper on the outskirts because the price was right, and we wanted some peace and quiet after living in Des Moines for years. The first few months were normal, just lots of repairs, painting, and settling in. Sarah loved sitting in the garage at night, smoking and enjoying the quiet. Our place sits on a small rise, about half a mile from town, so you can see the town lights in the distance. Not much to look at, but it's peaceful. Everything changed last November. I was working late in my home office when Sarah burst in, her face pale. She'd been in the garage having her usual cigarette when she heard what she described as heavy footsteps circling the garage. She thought it was me at first, but when she called out and got no response, she got scared. Marcus, it was pacing around out there, she told me, her hands shaking as she lit another cigarette inside, which she never does. And the breathing, I could hear something breathing, like really deep and rhythmic. I grabbed a flashlight and my baseball bat and went outside. The motion sensor lights were on, but I didn't see anything. No footprints in the soft ground either, though it had been dry for weeks. I chalked it up to raccoons, or maybe the neighbor's dog getting loose. But it happened again the next night, and the night after. Always when Sarah was alone in the garage. Always just the footsteps and breathing, never showing itself. It knows I'm there, she said after the fourth night. It's toying with me, walking around just out of sight. I started joining her for her smoke breaks. For a week, nothing happened when I was there. I was about to tell her it was just her imagination when we both saw it. We were sitting in the garage with the door open, looking toward town. It was around 11 at night, clear skies, just a sliver of moon. The town lights were visible in the distance. Street lights, porch lights, the gas station sign. Then something moved between us and the town, a massive dark shape, just for a second, blocking out a section of lights. It moved fast, but not like it was running, more like one giant stride. Did you see that? Sarah grabbed my arm so hard it left marks. I did. And that's when I started to get really freaked out. Based on where we were sitting and the distance to town, whatever passed between us and those lights had to be at least 8 feet tall, probably taller. There's nothing out here that big, I remember saying. Our property backs up to an empty field that stretches for miles. The nearest wooded area is about 2 miles away. Not exactly close enough for something that size to hide. For the next couple weeks, we kept seeing glimpses, always at night, always just a shadow or a shape, never clear enough to identify. We installed security cameras, but they never caught anything except one night when all 3 cameras went offline simultaneously for about 20 minutes. The real terror came in early December. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of something outside our bedroom wall. Our bed is pushed up against the exterior wall of the house, and I could hear something right on the other side. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't a branch scraping the siding. It was a growl, low, rumbling, vibrating through the wall and into my chest. It was so deep I could feel it more than hear it. No animal around here makes a sound like that. Not coyotes, not even the mountain lions that occasionally pass through. I was paralyzed with fear, lying there feeling this growl resonate through the wall. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I was about to wake Sarah when she burst into the bedroom from the bathroom, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. "It was right outside the garage wall when I was in there." That's when I realized whatever this thing was, it had circled our entire house in seconds. The garage is on the opposite side from our bedroom, at least 60 feet away. We didn't sleep that night, or the next. We took turns keeping watch, but it didn't come back. Not that we could hear anyway. The fields around our house were harvested by then, just stubble remaining. There's literally nowhere for something large to hide. Our nearest neighbor is over a quarter-mile away. We're exposed on all sides by flat open terrain. And yet something was out there, something big. I called the sheriff, but he just told me it was probably coyotes getting bold with winter coming on. He promised to drive by more often, but didn't seem concerned. I didn't mention how tall the thing seemed, or the growl that no coyote could make. By mid-December, Sarah refused to go into the garage alone after dark. I started parking my car right up to the door so she could get in and out quickly. We kept all the blinds closed at night. The motion lights would trigger sometimes, but whenever I looked out, I couldn't see anything. Then came the night of December 23rd. We were both in the living room watching TV around 9 p.m. when something hit the house. Not like a branch or debris, like something had slammed into it high up near the roofline. The whole house shook. Picture frames fell off the wall. I ran outside with my flashlight, scanning the side of the house and the roof. There was a dent in the aluminum siding about 12 feet up. A large, smooth depression like something had pressed into it with tremendous force. No scratches, no sign of impact, just a perfect curve pushed inward. Standing in the yard, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up. I swept the light across the empty field behind our house, and for just a split second, I caught a glimpse of something at the edge of the beam's reach. Two reflective eyes, set wide apart, much higher off the ground than a person's would be. They glinted in the light and then were gone. I ran back inside, locked every door, and called the sheriff again. He sent a deputy out who looked at the dent and suggested a large bird might have hit the house. When I pointed out the dent was concave, not the result of an impact, he just shrugged and said he'd file a report. The week between Christmas and New Year's was quiet. Too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Sarah and I were jumpy, stressed, not sleeping well. We discussed moving, but we'd sunk most of our savings into this place. We couldn't afford to just leave. On New Year's Eve, we decided to stay in rather than drive to Des Moines for a party. Around 11:30, the power went out. No storm, no wind, just suddenly dark. Our generator kicked in after a few seconds, but those moments of darkness were terrifying. I called the power company. They said there was no outage reported in our area. Our house was the only one affected. I went to check the breaker box in the garage, Sarah trailing nervously behind me. The main breaker hadn't tripped. Looking closer, I noticed the cable coming into the box from outside looked damaged, not cut cleanly, but crushed and partially pulled away from the house. As we stood there examining it, we both heard it, that same deep resonating growl, but louder now. It seemed to come from all around us, vibrating through the concrete floor of the garage. Sarah grabbed my arm. "It's circling again," she whispered. I could hear it too. Heavy footsteps, deliberately paced, moving around the garage. The motion lights outside didn't trigger. Nothing showed on the security cameras on my phone. But something was out there, walking slowly around the building. We backed into the house and locked the door behind us. The footsteps stopped. For almost an hour, we sat in silence, listening. Nothing. Finally, Sarah fell asleep on the couch. I kept watch, my bat in hand, staring at the garage door. Around 3 in the morning, I dozed off too. I woke to the sound of Sarah screaming. Daylight was streaming through the windows. Sarah was standing by the sliding glass door that leads to our back patio, pointing outside. Across the flat, empty field behind our house, leading away from our patio and disappearing into the distance, was a single line of tracks. Not animal tracks, not anything I recognized. Each impression was nearly 2 feet long and a foot wide, pressed deep into the hard winter ground. They were spaced about 8 feet apart. Whatever made them had stood right outside our door, looking in at us while we slept. The tracks led straight across the field toward the distant tree line 2 miles away. No deviation, no hesitation, just a direct path. I followed them about 100 yards before I got too freaked out to continue alone. When I got back to the house, Sarah was packing a bag. She insisted on staying with her sister for a few days. I didn't blame her. I almost went too. But someone needed to deal with the sheriff, the power company, figure out what the hell was going on. The power crew came out and fixed the cable. They couldn't explain how it got damaged. It was mounted 15 feet up on a pole. The sheriff's deputy who came to look at the tracks just shook his head and said they were probably left by a large deer that had been walking funny. When I pointed out deer don't leave single tracks 15 feet apart, he just changed the subject. That was yesterday. Sarah's still at her sister's. I'm alone in the house now. I haven't heard or seen anything since the tracks appeared, but I can't shake this feeling of being watched. Every sound makes me jump. The house creaks and settles, and each time I wonder if it's weight on the roof. It's getting dark now. I've got all the lights on, doors locked, bat beside me. I don't know what's out there or why it's focused on our house. There's literally nowhere for something that size to hide around here, yet somehow it remains unseen except for those brief glimpses. I keep coming back to one question. What was it doing standing outside our door, looking in at us? Was it curious? Hunting? I don't know which possibility is worse. I hear something outside now, heavy footsteps in the yard. The motion lights just came on, but I can't see anything from where I'm sitting. It's just like before, the sound of something large, circling, breathing. I don't know what to do. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's real, and it's out there. And tonight I'm alone. Story 15. I've been debating for over 7 years whether to share this, but it's eating away at me. I need to tell someone who might actually believe me, instead of giving me that "sure, buddy" look my friends give whenever I hint at what happened. This happened back in October of 2016. My wife Rebecca and I needed to get away from the stress of our jobs, so we booked this little cabin in the Ozark Highlands near Winona, Missouri. We're both pretty outdoorsy, but we weren't looking for anything extreme, just some quiet time in nature, away from emails and phone calls. The cabin looked perfect online, simple, rustic, and completely isolated on this little gravel road surrounded by forest ridges. We arrived Friday afternoon. The drive there was beautiful with all the fall colors, and we were in great spirits. The cabin was exactly what we wanted. Nothing fancy, just a small kitchen, a living area with a fireplace, a bedroom, and a tiny porch facing the woods. After unpacking, we made dinner together and opened a bottle of wine. It felt so good to be away from everything. Around 9:30 that night, we decided to take a short drive to explore the area a bit. It was stupid in hindsight. We should have just stayed at the cabin, but we were feeling adventurous after the wine. I grabbed a thermos of coffee and we jumped in our Ford Escape. We drove maybe 3 or 4 miles up the gravel road, then turned onto this narrow side path that looked like it might lead to a good viewpoint. The forest was thick on both sides, these tall oak and pine trees that made the road feel like a tunnel. Our headlights carved out the path ahead, but everything beyond that first line of trees was pitch black. We found a little turnout and pulled over, killed the engine but left the battery on so we could have some heat. I remember looking at the dashboard clock. It was 9:47. We rolled the windows down a couple inches to hear the night sounds and just sat there sipping coffee, holding hands. That's when I first noticed something was off. Rebecca must have felt it too because she squeezed my hand tighter. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I didn't, and that was exactly the problem. There was nothing, no crickets, no owls, not even the sound of leaves rustling. The silence was so complete it felt physical, like pressure against my ears. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that silence in the woods usually means something's wrong. We sat there for maybe 5 minutes, growing increasingly uneasy when we heard the first snap. It came from behind the car, maybe 30 yards back in the woods, a deliberate breaking of a branch. Not like when a dead limb falls, but the kind of snap that happens when something large steps on a branch and breaks it. Then another snap. Closer this time. Daniel ... Rebecca's voice was barely audible. "Something's out there." I tried to reassure her. Probably just a deer. But I didn't believe it myself. Deer move differently. They're cautious, light-footed. This sounded heavy, methodical. The footsteps, because that's clearly what they were, continued circling around to the passenger side where Rebecca sat. Each step was accompanied by the crunch of leaves and occasional snapping of twigs. Whatever it was big, and it wasn't trying to be completely silent. "We should go," Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling. "Now." I was about to start the engine when something slammed into the back of our car. The entire vehicle rocked forward like we'd been rear-ended. Rebecca screamed and I fumbled for the keys, dropping them between the seats. "Lock the doors!" Rebecca yelled, reaching for her door lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find the keys. I finally grabbed them and jammed the key into the ignition just as something hit us again, harder this time. The back end of the car actually lifted up off the ground for a second before dropping back down with a metallic bounce. I remember the sick feeling in my stomach, knowing that whatever was out there had just partially picked up our 3,000-pound SUV. The engine roared to life. But before I could shift into drive, Rebecca let out this sound I'll never forget. Not quite a scream, more like all the air being forced from her lungs at once. I looked over and saw what had stolen her breath. Standing right next to her window, illuminated partly by moonlight filtering through the trees and partly by the glow of our dashboard lights, was, I still struggle with what to call it, a creature, a being, something that shouldn't exist. It was massive, at least 7 or 8 feet tall, with shoulders twice as wide as mine. The body was covered in dark brown hair, longer around the shoulders and hanging down the impossibly long arms. The chest was broader than seemed possible for any animal I know, with shorter hair there that showed the outline of solid muscle underneath. But it was the face that froze my blood. Its eyes caught the dashboard light and reflected back with a reddish glow, set deep under a heavy brow ridge. The nose was wide and flat, almost like a gorilla's, but different. Its mouth was slightly open, showing teeth that looked yellowed and blunt, but human-like, too human-like. The thing slapped Rebecca's window with an open palm, making the glass flex inward like it might shatter. The hand alone covered almost the entire window. I shifted into drive and stomped on the gas, but the tires just spun in the loose gravel, kicking up stones behind us. Then it moved to the front of the car and put both hands on the hood. The front end of our car actually dipped down under its weight. I could see its fingers, thick, dark, with nails that looked almost like claws, pressing into the metal. The face was fully visible now in our headlights, and its eyes locked with mine for a moment that felt like forever. I've never felt smaller or more helpless than in that moment. It wasn't just fear. It was the absolute certainty that we were completely at this thing's mercy. If it wanted in our car, it was getting in. The tires finally caught traction and we lurched forward. The creature stepped back, not in a hurried way, just calmly removing its hands from our hood. As we sped away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it standing in the middle of the road. Then it threw its head back and let out this sound. Not quite a roar, not quite a scream, but something in between that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. We drove back to the cabin in complete silence, both of us trembling. I parked right by the door and we ran inside, locking everything behind us. We sat on the couch all night, jumping at every sound, too terrified to even look out the windows. Neither of us slept. When dawn finally came, we ventured outside to get our bags from the car. That's when we saw the evidence. Large, distinct handprints in the dust on the hood and bumper. There were smudges along Rebecca's door panel where it had touched the car. The back bumper was slightly dented inward. We didn't even discuss it. We threw our stuff in the car and left immediately, not even bothering to clean up the cabin. The entire 3-hour drive home, we barely spoke. What was there to say? We'd both seen it. We both knew what had happened. In the months that followed, I did some research. There have been Sasquatch sightings in the Ozarks for decades. Some people claim they're just territorial, not necessarily aggressive. But that doesn't change what we experienced. The worst part is the helplessness I still feel when I think about it. Our technology, our vehicle, our supposed dominance as humans, none of it mattered. That thing could have torn through our car like it was made of cardboard if it wanted to. Sometimes I wonder why it didn't. Was it just curious, warning us away? I'll never know. Rebecca and I don't talk about it much anymore. We've never gone back to the Ozarks, and our camping trips are now limited to busy, established campgrounds. I still freeze up when I hear branches breaking in the woods. The image that haunts me most isn't even the creature's face. It's the way my entire SUV dipped when it put its hands on the hood. The casual display of strength that made me realize how fragile the barrier between us really was. And sometimes, when I'm driving at night and look in my rearview mirror, I half expect to see those eyes reflecting back at me. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm not even sure I would believe it if someone else told me this story. All I know is what we saw that night changed something fundamental in how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, and sometimes it's better to leave them alone. Story 16. I've never been able to tell this story to anyone before now. For nearly a decade, I kept my mouth shut about what happened that day in Nevada. Who would believe me anyway? But after my cousin finally broke his silence back in 2014, I figured maybe it's time I shared my perspective too. It was February 2005. I was only 6 years old at the time. But some memories burn themselves into your brain, no matter how young you are. My Uncle Dave had invited me and my older cousin Tyler on a weekend trip to Winnemucca, Nevada. Tyler was 14 then, practically an adult in my eyes. Uncle Dave was this outdoorsy type, hunting, fishing, hiking, the whole package. He brought his dog Max along too, this massive German shepherd mix who wasn't afraid of anything. I'd seen that dog chase off a coyote once, without hesitation. The morning started normal enough. We'd stayed in this cheap motel the night before, and I remember being excited because Uncle Dave let me have chocolate milk with breakfast. It was cold that February, really cold. There was deep snow everywhere, but Dave insisted we'd have an adventure hiking up in the mountains just outside town. He knew some trail that supposedly had amazing views. We drove about 30 minutes from Winnemucca in Dave's old pickup truck. I remember the heater barely worked, and my toes were already cold inside my boots. When we parked, there wasn't another vehicle in sight. Just this small clearing at the base of a mountain with pines and snow. As far as you could see, the snow was deep, coming up past my knees in some spots. But I was bundled up in this puffy blue coat my mom had insisted I bring. Max jumped out of the truck first, immediately plowing through the snow, his tail wagging like crazy. He always led the way on hikes. Uncle Dave helped me out of the truck and made sure my gloves were on tight. "Stay close to Tyler," he told me. "Don't want you disappearing in a snowdrift." The hike started out fun. Tyler and I were making snowballs and throwing them at trees, while Uncle Dave took pictures with his old film camera. Max was running circles around us, diving into snow piles and popping back out covered in white. It was steep in some parts, and Tyler had to help pull me up, but I didn't mind. I felt like a real explorer. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour when I first noticed something wasn't right. Max, who had been bounding ahead of us the whole time, suddenly stopped, his ears perked up, and he stood completely still, staring up the mountain. I followed his gaze but couldn't see anything unusual at first. Just more trees and snow. Then I saw it, or him, about halfway up the slope, partially obscured by some pine trees. "Look," I said, pointing up the mountain. "There's a man up there." Uncle Dave squinted in the direction I was pointing. "Where, buddy? I don't see anyone." "Right there," I insisted, still pointing. "By those trees. He's really big." Tyler laughed and ruffled my hair. "That's probably just a shadow or a tree stump, Squirt. Nobody else is up here but us." "But I saw him," I protested. "He was looking at us." Uncle Dave knelt down beside me. "Listen, kiddo, there's no one else out here. We're the only car in the parking area, and look," he pointed at the pristine snow around us. "There are no other footprints anywhere, just ours and Max's." He was right. The snow was untouched except for our own tracks leading back down the mountain. I frowned, confused. I was so sure I'd seen someone. "Maybe it was a deer," Tyler suggested. I shook my head. It was standing up like a person. Uncle Dave exchanged a look with Tyler that I recognized even at 6 years old. That humoring the kid look adults give each other. "Tell you what," Uncle Dave said, "we'll keep our eyes open, but I bet it was just your imagination playing tricks. Happens to the best of us in the wilderness." I wasn't convinced, but I nodded anyway. We continued hiking, but I kept looking back over my shoulder. Something felt off now. The fun adventure vibe had shifted into something else. Even the woods seemed quieter. We hiked for another 15 minutes or so. Max had gone ahead again, disappearing around a bend in the trail. Uncle Dave was telling Tyler about some fishing trip he was planning for the summer when we heard it, a high-pitched whimper that quickly turned into panicked barking. Before we could react, Max came tearing around the corner. I'd never seen a dog move so fast through deep snow. His ears were flat against his head, and he was making this horrible sound. Not barking anymore, but this frightened whining that made my stomach feel hollow. The strangest part? Max ran straight past Uncle Dave and came directly to me, pressing his body against my legs so hard I almost fell over. He was trembling violently. "What the hell?" Uncle Dave muttered, clearly shocked. "Max, what's wrong, boy?" I remember wrapping my small arms around Max's neck, feeling his rapid heartbeat. "He's scared," I whispered. That's when Uncle Dave's expression changed. The color drained from his face as he stared up the trail where Max had just come from. Tyler saw it too. I watched his eyes go wide. "Oh my God," Tyler whispered. I turned to look. Standing at the top of the ridge about 50 yards away was the figure I'd seen earlier. Except now I could see it clearly, and it wasn't a man. Not really. It stood upright on 2 legs, but it was massive, way taller than Uncle Dave, who was over 6 feet. It was covered in dark, matted hair or fur. The arms hung down unnaturally long at its sides. But it was the face that made my blood run cold. Not quite human. Not quite animal. The eyes were deep set beneath a prominent brow, and even from that distance I could feel it staring directly at us. Then it made a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Not a roar or a scream, but this low rumbling vocalization that seemed to vibrate the air around us. It was almost like speech, but distorted and wrong. The sound started low and built into something between a growl and a moan. Uncle Dave's hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Don't move," he whispered. His voice was shaking. The creature, because that's what it was, some kind of creature, took a step forward, then another. It was moving slowly, deliberately, making that terrible sound continuously. With each step it swayed slightly, its long arms swinging. "Dave ... Tyler's voice cracked with fear. Max was still pressed against my legs, his whole body trembling. This dog who had once fought off a mountain lion was now cowering behind a 6-year-old kid. That scared me more than anything. "Okay," Uncle Dave said very quietly. "We're going to back up slowly, no sudden movements." We started to retreat, taking small steps backward. The creature kept advancing, picking up pace. The sounds it was making changed, becoming faster, more aggressive. It was like it knew we were trying to leave. Uncle Dave suddenly cursed under his breath. "Screw this, Tyler. Pick up your cousin now." Tyler scooped me up into his arms. I remember dropping my little red toy car I'd been carrying in my pocket. It disappeared into the snow, but there was no way I was stopping to get it. "Run," Uncle Dave said. "Back to the truck. Go." We ran, or at least Uncle Dave and Tyler ran, while I bounced in Tyler's arms, looking over his shoulder. Max bolted ahead, leading the way back down the trail. The creature let out a sound that was almost like a roar and moved faster. Running through deep snow is nearly impossible. Tyler stumbled several times, struggling to keep hold of me while plowing through drifts that came up to his knees. Uncle Dave stayed behind us, constantly looking back. "It's following us," he shouted. I could see it over Tyler's shoulder, moving with surprising speed for something so large. It wasn't running exactly, more like taking huge, powerful strides that ate up the distance between us. We reached a steeper section of trail. Tyler lost his footing, and we both went down, tumbling through the snow. I remember the cold wetness seeping through my clothes, the disorientation, and the absolute terror as I struggled to my feet. Uncle Dave grabbed me this time, hoisting me onto his back. "Hold on tight," he yelled. I wrapped my arms around his neck, probably choking him, but he didn't complain. Looking back, I could see the creature was only about 30 yards behind us now, close enough that I could make out details I wish I could forget. The way its muscles moved beneath the dark hair, the steam coming from its mouth in the cold air, the unnaturally long fingers at the ends of those swinging arms. We continued our desperate flight down the mountain. The truck seemed impossibly far away. My uncle was breathing hard, each exhale creating a cloud of vapor. Tyler had recovered and was running alongside us, repeatedly looking back. "It's gaining," he shouted. The creature was moving faster now, covering ground with those massive strides. The sounds it made had changed again, higher pitched, almost like it was excited by the chase. My small hands gripped Uncle Dave's jacket so tight my fingers cramped. Max had reached the truck and was frantically circling it, barking and howling. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was still nobody else around. No other hikers, no park rangers, nobody to help us. We burst out of the tree line into the small clearing where we'd parked. Uncle Dave practically threw me at Tyler. "Get him in the truck," he shouted, fumbling for his keys. Tyler yanked open the passenger door and shoved me inside, climbing in after me. Max somehow squeezed in too, still whimpering. Uncle Dave jumped into the driver's seat, hands shaking so badly he dropped the keys on the floor. "Where is it?" I cried, unable to see out the windows from my position, squeezed between Tyler and Max. "It stopped at the tree line," Tyler said, his voice cracking. "It's just standing there watching us." Uncle Dave finally got the key in the ignition. The truck roared to life, and he slammed it into reverse, spinning the tires in the snow before gaining traction. As we pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of the creature standing at the edge of the forest. It raised one of those long arms, almost like it was waving goodbye. The drive back to town was completely silent, except for our heavy breathing and Max's occasional whimpers. Nobody spoke about what we'd seen. Not that day, not the next morning when we packed up and left Winnemucca a day earlier than planned, not on the long drive home. It was like we all silently agreed to pretend it never happened. When my mom asked how the trip was, Uncle Dave just said, "Cold, too much snow for good hiking." Tyler avoided looking at me for weeks afterward. For years, I convinced myself it was a childhood nightmare or an overactive imagination. But Max was never the same after that day. He became nervous around forests, refused to go on hikes, and would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night barking at nothing. Then in 2014, I learned that Tyler had finally broken his silence and told someone from a Bigfoot research group about what happened. He contacted me after, saying he couldn't keep it bottled up anymore, said he'd been having nightmares for years. To this day, I still can't explain what we encountered on that mountain in Winnemucca. I've researched Native American legends from the area, read accounts of other sightings, tried to find some rational explanation. Nothing fits except the one thing that seems impossible. Sometimes I still wake up hearing that sound, that deep rumbling vocalization that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. And I wonder if somewhere in those Nevada mountains, that creature remembers us too. Story 17. I'm still trying to process what happened last weekend. I've been hiking all my life, but nothing prepared me for this. Nothing. I keep going over it in my head, wondering if there was something I missed, some explanation that would make sense. But there isn't. I know what I saw. For context, I've been hiking in Brendan T. Burns State Forest in southern New Jersey for over 15 years. I know those trails like the back of my hand. Every ridge, every creek, every landmark. I've seen all kinds of wildlife there. Deer, foxes, coyotes, even black bears. I respect nature and know how to handle myself in the woods. My stepson Connor is 13 now, and I've been taking him hiking since he was 7. He's a good kid, smart, observant, loves being outdoors. This was supposed to be just another day hike, nothing special. We decided to explore a section on the opposite side of this ridge we normally stick to. I'd seen it on the map, but never bothered checking it out before. We got to the trailhead around 9 in the morning. Weather was perfect. Clear skies, about 65 degrees, slight breeze. We had our day packs with water, lunch, first aid kit, the usual stuff. Connor brought his new binoculars. His mom got him for his birthday last month. He was excited to try them out. About 2 hours in, we crossed over the ridge and started heading down into this hollow I'd never been to before. The difference was immediate. The whole area was much denser than our usual spots. Huge old-growth timber creating this thick canopy overhead, hardly any sunlight getting through. The ground was covered in this lush, bright green moss that seemed to glow in the dim light. It was beautiful, but different. Felt older somehow. We'd been walking through this hollow for maybe 20 minutes when we first heard it, this weird laughing sound. Not human laughing, more like a low, ha-ha-ha kind of noise. At first, I thought it might be some kind of bird I wasn't familiar with. Then it was followed by this deep growl that sent chills up my spine. I've heard black bears before. This wasn't that. This was deeper, more deliberate somehow. I called out loudly, "Hey, bear!" like you're supposed to do to scare them off. That's when everything went crazy. The forest erupted with this deep wailing sound, almost like a siren but organic, if that makes any sense. Then there was this huffing noise, these guttural grunts that seemed to come from something with lungs way bigger than mine. Connor grabbed my arm. We both just froze. I remember the look on his face, pure fear. I tried to keep calm for his sake, but my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. About 60 yards ahead of us, the treetops started swaying violently. There was no wind, none. The rest of the forest was completely still, just those specific trees moving like something was shaking them, hard. Through gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of something. It was brownish black, standing upright and tall, really tall. I'm 6 feet, and this thing looked to be at least 7 feet, maybe more. It was moving between the trees methodically, deliberately. What was most unnerving was how it kept larger trees between us and it, like it knew exactly where we were and was making sure to stay partially hidden. But it was shaking these smaller trees maybe 8 to 16 inches in diameter, with enough force that their tops were colliding with each other. The sound of branches whipping against each other filled the air. Connor whispered, "What is that?" His voice was shaking. I honestly didn't know what to tell him. I've never believed in monsters or cryptids or any of that stuff. I'm a practical guy. But what I was seeing didn't fit anything I knew. This went on for several minutes, the trees shaking, the glimpses of this creature moving between them, then everything went silent, completely silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. The kind of silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums. That silence lasted maybe 30 seconds before we heard it moving again. Rapid footsteps through the dry leaves. Not four-legged, running like a bear or deer. This was bipedal, 2 legs, moving fast. It darted between trees, circling around to a different position. Then the tree demonstration started again, but more intense. This thing was systematically bending trees 6 to 8 inches thick until they cracked. I could hear the wood splintering. Some of them fell completely. This wasn't random destruction. It felt purposeful, like it was sending a message. Look what I can do. Look how strong I am. Connor was trembling next to me. He tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Can we go, please?" I nodded, but didn't move yet. Some stupid part of me wanted to know what we were dealing with. Needed to know. When the disturbance finally stopped, I told Connor to stay put. He begged me not to go closer, but I assured him I'd just take a quick look and come right back. I moved forward cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. About 40 yards ahead, I found where the activity had happened, fresh breaks in the trees, all pointing downhill in the same direction. While I was examining them, I heard something from up the slope, the sound of rocks being rolled down. Not small pebbles, but substantial rocks that crashed through the underbrush as they descended. I looked up. What I initially thought was a dark stump suddenly shifted position. It was still there, watching us. The creature was crouched low beside a massive oak tree, partially hidden but definitely observing. Even from that distance, I could feel its eyes on me. Intelligent eyes, assessing me. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that was the worst thing I could do. Instead, I slowly backed away, never turning my back to it. When I reached Connor, I calmly said, "Let's head back now." I didn't want to frighten him more than he already was. As we started to leave, I remembered the lunch in my pack. I don't know why I did this, it was pure instinct, but I took out my peanut butter and jelly sandwich and placed it on a nearby stump, like a peace offering. Something inside me felt like this was the right thing to do. We hiked back at a quick pace, not running, but definitely not dawdling. Connor kept looking back over his shoulder. Neither of us said much until we were back over the ridge and on familiar terrain. "What was that?" Connor finally asked when we reached the main trail. "I'm not sure," I answered honestly, but I think it was letting us know we were in its territory. The drive home was quiet. Connor stared out the window the whole time. I could tell he was processing what had happened, just like I was. I've been back to that area twice since then, alone. Both times, I found things that made my skin crawl, strange rock formations. 3 rocks stacked in ways that couldn't happen naturally, hollowed areas in the ground near fallen logs, like something large had created shelter spaces. And both times, I left food. Once an apple, once a granola bar. Both times the food was gone when I returned later. What haunts me most is the intelligence behind what I saw. This wasn't an animal acting on instinct, the way it positioned itself, the deliberate tree breaking, the way it watched us from a distance. All of it suggested something with thought processes, something that was communicating in its own way. I've researched local wildlife extensively since then. Nothing explains what we saw. Black bears don't stand at 7 feet tall on 2 legs for extended periods. They don't systematically break trees to display dominance. They don't watch you with what I can only describe as calculated interest. I haven't told many people about this. Who would believe it? My wife knows something happened. Connor told her we saw something scary in the woods, but I downplayed it, said it was probably a bear, but I know better. There's something out there in those remote hills of southern New Jersey, something powerful, something intelligent, something that deserves respect. I still hike in Brendan T. Burns State Forest, but I stay on my side of the ridge now, Some areas of the woods aren't meant for us. That hollow with its ancient trees and moss-covered ground belongs to something else. Something that was there long before me and will be there long after I'm gone. Connor refuses to go hiking with me anymore. Can't say I blame him. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still see those treetops swaying with no wind, still hear that deep siren-like wail, still feel those eyes watching me from the shadows. Whatever it was, it let us leave. It could have caught us easily if it wanted to, something that powerful, that fast, but it didn't. It just wanted us to know we were visitors in its home. Message received, loud and clear. I don't know if it was what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch or something else entirely. Labels don't really matter. What matters is that there are things in this world we don't understand, things that exist in the margins of our awareness. I've left that hollow alone since then. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, some territories are better left unclaimed. I just hope whatever lives there stays there, in its mossy hollow under the ancient trees, breaking timber and rolling stones down hillsides. And sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm alone with my thoughts, I wonder if it remembers me too. If it enjoyed the peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Story 18. I've spent 5 years trying to rationalize what happened to me during that backpacking trip in Canoe National Forest. 5 years of questioning my own senses, researching similar experiences and trying to convince myself there's a logical explanation. But I can't shake it. Whatever was out there was real, and it wanted me gone. This happened back in February 2017. I'd been planning a solo trip for months. Just me, my gear, and 3 days in the eastern part of Tonto. I'd hiked there before, but wanted to explore some of the less traveled areas. I consider myself an experienced backpacker, not expert level or anything, but I know what I'm doing. I've encountered wildlife before and know how to handle myself. This was different. I remember parking my car off this barely maintained access road. There wasn't another vehicle in sight, which was exactly what I wanted. I started my hike around mid-morning, following a dry wash for a few miles before cutting east into the hills. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, clear skies. I made good time and set up camp near this interesting rock outcropping that provided some natural shelter. I hadn't seen another person all day, which honestly was the whole point of going to that section of the forest. That first night was completely uneventful. I cooked dinner on my little camp stove, read a bit in my tent, then fell asleep around 10. The next day, I pushed deeper into the hills, covering maybe 8 miles. The terrain was challenging in spots, loose rock, some steep climbs, but nothing I couldn't handle. I found a small seasonal creek with a trickle of water and set up my second camp nearby. I filtered some water, had dinner, and crawled into my sleeping bag around 9, feeling that good kind of exhaustion that comes after a full day of hiking. I woke up suddenly around 3 in the morning. At first, I couldn't figure out what had disturbed me. Then it hit me, the complete absence of sound. If you've spent time in the wilderness, you know it's never completely silent, even at night. There's always something, insects, the rustling of small animals, wind in the trees. But there was nothing, just this overwhelming, unnatural silence that made the hair on my arms stand up. I laid there for maybe 5 minutes, straining to hear anything. Then I caught it, a faint shuffling sound outside my tent, like something large moving very carefully. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps circling my campsite. Whatever it was heavy. Each step had weight behind it, but it was moving with surprising stealth for something so big. My first thought was bear, but this didn't sound like a bear. Bears aren't typically so deliberate. They crash around, sniff loudly, investigate things directly. This felt calculated. It was circling, staying just outside the range where I could see it clearly through the tent walls, just pacing the perimeter of my camp with this methodical, patient movement. I didn't know what to do. I had bear spray, but wasn't even sure if this was a bear. I decided to stay still and quiet. Eventually, after what felt like forever but was probably around 20 minutes, the footsteps slowly faded away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just laid there clutching my bear spray and pocket knife like they would do anything against whatever was out there. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up. I didn't even make coffee, just stuffed everything in my pack and started hiking. I decided to change my planned route and head for higher ground where I'd have better visibility. I found a spot on a small rise with fewer trees and good sight lines in all directions. I felt safer there and decided to make camp early, around 4 in the afternoon. I spent the rest of the daylight hours gathering extra firewood and making sure my camp was secure. That night, I built a bigger fire than I normally would. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just a deer or elk the night before. But deep down, I knew better. I fell into an uneasy sleep around 10, exhausted from the night before. I jolted awake at what my watch said was 11:17. I'd only been asleep for about an hour. This time, I immediately knew what had woken me, breathing, deep, slow breathing about 30 feet from my tarp. I was using a simple tarp set up that night instead of my tent, thinking the openness would help me spot anything approaching. Now I regretted that decision intensely. The breathing was wrong. It was too controlled, too rhythmic for a wild animal, and it was coming from high up, not ground level where you'd expect from most wildlife. I froze, not daring to move, barely breathing myself. Then the footsteps started again, slow and heavy, moving toward me. Whatever it was circled my camp once, just like the night before, but this time it was closer. I could hear branches snapping under its weight. Then suddenly, something slammed into the ground behind my tarp with incredible force. It sounded like something huge had pounded the earth with its fist. Before I could react, something pushed hard against the side of my tarp shelter, making the whole thing shake violently. I could feel the pressure of whatever it was just inches from me through the fabric. Pure adrenaline kicked in. I grabbed my headlamp, switched it on, and shouted as loud as I could, "Hey, get out of here!" It was instinctive, the kind of thing they tell you to do with mountain lions or bears, make yourself seem big and loud. There was a moment of complete stillness. Then whatever it was crashed away through the brush, not running exactly, but moving quickly, snapping branches and rustling through undergrowth as it went. The sounds faded after about 15 seconds, but I knew it hadn't gone far. I stayed awake the entire night, headlamp on, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. I kept hearing noises from the forest around me, distant crashes, snapping twigs. It was still out there, watching, waiting. When dawn finally came, I'd made my decision. Trip over. I was getting the hell out of there. I packed up in record time and started hiking back toward the trailhead. It was about 12 miles and I planned to cover it in one push, no matter how exhausted I was. I'd been hiking for maybe an hour, moving at a fast clip down a ridge trail, when I first noticed the footsteps behind me. They would start up whenever I was moving, then stop when I stopped. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just an echo or my imagination, but after the third or fourth time, I knew something was following me. I picked up my pace, practically jogging down the trail. The footsteps behind me quickened too. I kept glancing back but couldn't see anything. The trail was winding through forest at this point, with limited visibility. That's when I caught movement to my left. Something dark and tall moving through the trees, parallel to the trail. It was keeping pace with me. About 50 yards away, I slowed down, and it slowed too. I stopped completely, and it stopped, partially hidden behind a large pine. My heart was hammering in my chest. Whatever this thing was, it had been stalking me for 2 days now. and it was intelligent enough to understand exactly what it was doing. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was deliberate intimidation. I started walking again, faster now, and it resumed as well, moving through the trees alongside me. It was getting closer, gradually reducing the distance between us. After about 15 minutes of this horrible game, it moved close enough that I got my first clear look at it. It was standing behind a fallen log, partially obscured by brush, but unmistakably there. Massive. At least 7 feet tall, probably more. It had a thick, solid body covered in dark hair. Not fur, but hair, except for its face. The skin there was a dark grayish color, leathery looking. Its eyes were deep set under a pronounced brow ridge, and they were fixed directly on me. Its mouth was slightly open, not in a threatening way, but almost like it was analyzing my scent. The way it was watching me was the most unnerving part. There was clear intelligence there. Calculation. When it stepped out from behind the fallen log and moved deliberately toward me, I broke. I just ran, sprinted down that trail like my life depended on it, which for all I knew, it did. I could hear it behind me. Fast, heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. Sometimes the sounds would fade as it cut through the forest, then emerge ahead of me, forcing me to change direction. This continued for what felt like miles. I couldn't always see it, but I could sense its presence, hear its movement through the trees. It was herding me, I realized later, driving me toward the trailhead, out of its territory. When I finally reached the parking area, I was drenched in sweat, my legs burning from the sustained sprint. I fumbled with my car keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. Before getting in, I turned for one last look at the forest edge. It was standing there, just inside the tree line, watching me. For a moment, our eyes met, and I felt a chill that went beyond physical fear. There was something in that gaze, not just animal intelligence, but awareness, purpose. Then it turned and melted back into the forest. I've spent countless hours researching what I encountered that day. Everything points to what people call Sasquatch or Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. Before this, I would have laughed at someone telling this same story, but I know what I saw. An intelligent bipedal creature that deliberately intimidated me until I left its territory. I haven't been back to Tonto National Forest since then. I still backpack, but never alone, and never in that region. Sometimes I wake up at night thinking I hear those slow, deliberate footsteps circling my house. The experience left me with an unshakable certainty that there are things in the wilderness we don't understand, and places where humans simply aren't welcome.